Chapter 225. Pride had a total of 105 points, and the overflow was more than 5 points. This meant that the Great Sin node, which could be extracted using the dragonfly skimming the surface of the water, had advanced a little. Could end up at 95 or 90 points. However, since the 89 points of rage had not overflowed his brain, it meant that the node was still above 89 points. Still, this was very good news. The Great Sin, which originally required more than 100 points to be safely extracted, could now be extracted with more than 90 points. Not only did it increase the total amount that could be extracted, but it also lowered the danger line, which meant that there would be more room for future research. Dake suppressed his excitement and began to patiently sense the approximate value of the node. 5, 6, 7. When it reached 10 points, the overflow of pride finally reached its limit. The final node is about 95 points. After carefully sensing, Dake opened his eyes and waited quietly for more than 10 minutes. Then he used the same method to increase the overflow of bliss. The first website was https://vipcanshu. VIP. The final result was that the current node was indeed around 95 points. The standard line of 95 points was pushed forward by 5 points compared to the previous 100 points. 5 points did not seem like much, but it was actually very significant. Because this allowed Dake to see a possibility. Everyone knew that Soulless Curse and Underworld Magic could be improved. Using Underworld Magic to increase the concentration and output of emotions, making Great Sin easier to be extracted. Using Soulless Curse to reduce the brain's sealing effect, making Great Sin easier to overflow. The former increases the amount that can be extracted at one time. The latter increases the upper limit of the amount that can be extracted. If I can keep lowering the standard line, not only can I guarantee the experimental materials, but I can also keep increasing the safety. Unfortunately, both Underworld Magic and Soulless Curse are extremely difficult to improve. Among them, Soulless Curse is even harder to improve than Underworld Magic. If I have the chance to use the Holy Grail, I can work on Soulless Curse. Dake put down his pen and took the magic brain dropper from the side, preparing to extract today's Great Sin. According to the original plan, he would extract a drop of greed as research material first. Then he would consider other points. For example, collecting 7 points of greed to cultivate the fruit of greed. Or collect 10 points of pride to craft Pride 3. Other than that, he could also extract some of the various materials and accumulate them until he had enough to try refining the Great Sinner flower. However, as his research deepened, Dake realized that the method of refining the emotion card could no longer satisfy the refinement of the Great Sinner. He might need to develop an exclusive refining array to continue. If his judgment was not wrong, the probability of failure of forcibly refining the Great Sin pill, without developing an exclusive refining formation would be very high, which would cause a lot of time and resources to be wasted. Therefore, he was now a little hesitant about accumulating Great Sins and refining Great Sins. Comparatively, cultivating Fruit of Greed and crafting Pride 3 were more attractive to him. The Fruit of Greed could be used to create a new magic elf. Pride 3 should be able to unlock Illusory Beast, Ivan's new evolved form. Of course, if he gathered all 7 points of pride to cultivate the Fruit of Pride Fox, he might be able to create an evolved version of EV that corresponded to Fairy EV. In short, there were many choices. Dake picked up the magic brain dropper and placed the tip on his temple. Then he used Underworld Magic and sucked out a drop of greed. Then he dripped that drop of greed into the thinking bottle and carried out the last step of the night: observation and recording. This drop of greed still had 5 points. It emitted an extremely faint and surprisingly familiar aura. This is... Dake thought carefully and suddenly felt that the aura of greed and the strange aura emitted by the Holy Grail were slightly similar. This discovery made him feel very surprised. However, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it made sense. It was as if this similarity was very reasonable. This made Dake have a question. Greed, what is it? However, this kind of philosophical question was destined to have no fixed answer. He did not think for too long and got up to store that drop of greed in the worm tree. Then, he packed up his experiment tools and went to sleep. It was already very late, and he still had classes tomorrow. January 2nd, Tuesday. Sheng Malian Academy finally welcomed the first day of the second semester of the school year. The class schedule for the second semester of the first year was basically the same as the previous semester. However, the first class of the new semester was temporarily changed from a dual class to a summoning class by Professor Shi Erfu. Moreover, it was said that magical beasts, which had never been taught before, would be taught at irregular times this semester. In addition, the dual club's recruitment was scheduled to be held this Friday afternoon. Other than these points that needed to be taken note of, there was nothing else. It was the first morning after the short break, and most of the first-year students had not recovered from their idle state. It was only when Professor Shi Erfu entered the classroom that the students instinctively stopped talking. Dake raised his head from the textbook and saw Professor Shi Erfu without any makeup as usual. His facial features were exquisite, and his face was delicate, but he was more perfect than a lady with full makeup. That ethereal beauty that was inherited from the elven bloodline was like the uncanny workmanship of nature, and it always made people feel ashamed of themselves. Dake occasionally thought that maybe his sullen behavior was a good thing for the students. Otherwise, the students' attention would be firmly attracted by his beauty, and how would they be able to study seriously? Every family has its own difficulties. Half of the first summoning class was spent listening to Professor Shi Erfu's speech. The other half of the class was used to review the knowledge of the previous semester, especially the theory and practice related to sacrificial summoning. Dake was called to the stage to demonstrate, and of course, he used the summoning card for practice. Summoning cards were also divided into stars, but the surface of the card was a light ball with a magical power of 100 and an attack and defense of 0. He first used the normal summoning skill to activate two 2-star summoning cards, each of which took between 3 to 4 seconds to cast. Then, he used the sacrificial summoning skill to summon a 4-star summoning card, which took less than 10 seconds to cast. Not bad, it took less than 25 seconds. Professor Shi Erfu revealed a rare smile. One of the final exams of the first-year summoning class was to ask students to use the normal summoning skill to activate 3 magic guide cards within 2 rounds. One of the final exams of the second-year summoning class was to ask students to complete the sacrificial summoning of a 4-star magic guide spirit within 1 round. And Dake's summoning speed had far exceeded the first-year standards, and even the second-year assessment standards. In addition, the limit of the normal summoning skill and sacrificial summoning skill was 3 seconds. Therefore, the summoning limit of a 4-star magic guide spirit was 15 seconds. The increase in summoning speed became more and more difficult as one progressed. If one could complete the summoning of a 4-star magic guide spirit within 15 seconds, one would have reached the top standard. Ordinary 6th-year graduates might not be able to reach the limit. However, every duelist who could reach the next level could always maintain their top standard. Dake's outstanding performance attracted intense applause. He placed his hand on his chest, bowed slightly, and walked down the podium. No matter when and where, he was so eye-catching. Eudora, who was below the stage, looked at the golden-haired youth who walked down from the podium. It was as if she was looking at a shining sun, more dazzling than ever before. Her eyes shone slightly, and a strange blush appeared on her face. When Dake's gaze swept over, she quickly lowered her head and pretended that she had been listening attentively. White and Luo Boat, who were in the back row, were unexpectedly not distracted. Deanna responded to his gaze with a smile. A new semester had begun. During the break after the summoning class, Dake walked to the arithmetic class. A new semester might not necessarily be a new atmosphere. The little magisters had gone through the baptism of homework at the end of the last semester. At the beginning of the semester, they were all beaten back to their original state. Other than Deanna and Luo Si who followed Dake, only Ai Ma came to the arithmetic class first. However, overall it was indeed more orderly than last semester. 5 minutes before the class bell rang, all the students had already arrived. The students gathered in twos and threes, talking about all kinds of topics. Even in the colder winter, they were still full of vitality. Ding ding ding. The little fairy with dragonfly wings flew in absent-mindedly. After Christmas, Dake only saw her once at the opening ceremony. The constant hangover didn't affect the little fairy's appearance. However, Professor Didi's departure always had a bad influence. Professor Li would occasionally show a particularly lonely side. However, she didn't show it too much in front of the students. Today, the little fairy was still cheerful, cute, and lazy. When she occasionally met the golden-haired youth's gaze, there was a hint of shyness that was difficult to hide. Dake. From the first minute of the lesson, the main topic of the arithmetic class began. Professor Li drew a circle, a triangle, and a square on the blackboard and began to teach plane geometry. Dake felt that she would occasionally deliberately avoid looking at him, but he didn't feel anything else. For him, the new semester's arithmetic class was still a piece of knowledge that he could easily grasp. He simply took out the fusion and zoo refining problems and used the arithmetic time to think carefully. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he always felt that the efficiency of reading and solving problems during class was higher than after class, especially when solving problems that had nothing to do with the class. After solving problems for more than an hour, he learned a lot. Most of the learning process was dry and boring. We can't always expect to find joy in learning. Just like how we can't always expect to learn knowledge in games. After the arithmetic class, Dake, Anna, and Luo C went to the cafeteria to eat lunch. They didn't go to the library like at the beginning of the semester. Instead, they returned to the aristocrat house's tower. The moment they entered the dormitory, the noisy atmosphere inside instantly froze. The magic elves slowly turned their heads and looked at their master who appeared at the door. They quietly stopped making noise and pretended to be serious as they picked up the early education picture books that they didn't really understand. Dake Dimming, the head of the kindergarten in Aristocrat House 201, face-bombed again. However, he had to eat the flowers he planted and the fruits he harvested. The magic elves couldn't disobey their master's orders. If he wanted to, he could give the order to study seriously, and force the magic elves to study to death when he wasn't around. However, if he did that, he would be putting the cart before the horse. Let nature take its course. Dake sighed and threw himself on the bed and took a nap. When he woke up, there were a few more magic elves curled up beside him. However, he had gradually gotten used to this situation. After he got up, he just gently rubbed the head of one of the magic elves and got out of bed. Tuesday afternoon was the history of magic. It was the first class of the new history of magic professor. Unlike some students who were greatly influenced by their appearance, he was very interested in the hero of the Spear Ryan Hex's first class. He wanted to listen to his personal war stories. However, as soon as Dake left the room, Ivan, who had just been lucky enough to enjoy Dake's touch, suddenly opened his eyes wide and looked at his biggest competitor, the Diru Beast. Ha, childish. The Diru Beast slowly got up from the bed, his tone full of disdain. However, Ivan understood in a second. This guy was showing off that he could communicate with his master verbally. Thus, a tug-of-war that Dake couldn't see started again. Ryan Hex didn't inherit the position of the Dean of the Academy of Fools. Instead, he continued his habit of teaching the history of magic at the end of last year. He gathered the students of the 4 academies in a large lecture hall and taught them together. The history of magic didn't need to be explained in detail, so there was no difference between 2 classes and 1 class. For the new professor, it was easier to get used to the position by gathering the students of the same school year. In fact, the history of magic was in the Shang-Malian Academy's curriculum. It was a political and ideological class. On one hand, the academy hoped that the students wouldn't forget history. On the other hand, they hoped that the students could learn from history and establish correct values. Thus, the history of magic classes were very broad. Last semester there were 3 professors, Dee Dee, the principal, and Claire. They all taught completely different things. However, the core ideas they expressed were all similar. Remember the sacrifice of the heroes and cherish the hard-won peace. This was a dovish way of thinking. However, as soon as Mr. Ryan Hex opened his mouth, Dake immediately understood that this Professor Hex was from the pro-war faction. He had already lost an arm, a leg, and an eye on the battlefield. The war didn't bring him any tangible benefits other than glory. However, his nostalgia for the war period could be heard even by a girl. 2 in 1/4/100. Chapter 226. Ryan Hux was not a hero at the end of the war. His era was at the end of the war 20 to 30 years ago. At that time, the golden generation led by heroes such as the hero, the Valkyrie, and the Saintess of the battlefield had not even been born. Although magical technology had appeared, it was still in a period of bumpy development and was far from being able to widen the gap with magic. Ryan Hux was an orthodox spearman. When he was young, he forged a spear from a dragon's spine and made many contributions. The battle that made him famous was the Violet Defense Battle that took place in Tomorrow's Canyon. At that time, in order to protect the Violet Princess of the Green Plains dwarf tribe, Hanks, who was in his prime, guarded Tomorrow's Canyon by himself. His dragon's pine spear was invincible, and he blocked the 3,000 demon army outside the canyon, not even half a step closer. According to eyewitnesses, the night was hanging low and the darkness was boundless. The dragon's soul roared like thunder, and a golden dragon soared up from the canyon, illuminating half of the sky. It was also after that battle that the Green Plains dwarf tribe changed their bad impression of humans and agreed to sign the 100 Races Treaty, which laid an indispensable foundation for the 100 Races Alliance. Back in the day, I was also a famous handsome man in the military. Remember the website, Vipkanshu. 6 Professor Hux could not help but stomp his prosthetic leg as he spoke. Princess Violet has adored me ever since that battle. But who am I, Hanks? Of course, I can't marry into the dwarf tribe and become their son-in-law. When I was your age, I was already conscripted into the army. I carried corpses on the front lines, and later on, I dominated the battlefield, riding a horse against 1,000. It was awesome. At that time, I was young and full of vigor, and I looked at everyone as if they were shorter than me. I only wanted to use my dragon's pine spear to pierce through the sky. The more Hank spoke, the more agitated his tone became. It was as if he had returned to that era. Beside him were his undefeated comrades. In front of him were the mighty demon army, and the whole sky was covered by yellow sand. Only by waving a spear could one see clearly. Suddenly, a student raised his hand and asked, "Professor Hux, is the Green Plains dwarf princess also green?" Hux was stunned for a moment before he laughed. Of course, the princess of the Green Plains dwarves is also a Green Plains dwarf. The Verdant Plains dwarves lived in the Verdant Plains for a long time. Due to the influence of the environment, they had green skin. The entire clan regarded green as beauty, and the Verdant Plains princess was naturally the green of the green. If he wasn't so green, he wouldn't have rejected Princess Violet's invitation so decisively. There were some low chuckles in the classroom. Professor Hex did not care. He was already in such dire straits that he had long since become accustomed to cold looks and mockery. He would not be displeased by a harmless laugh. Other than the occasional bragging, Professor Hex's lectures were quite practical. He was not like Professor Dee Dee, who read by the book, nor was he like Headmaster Aerti, who focused on heroes. He was also not as knowledgeable as Professor Claire. He only had a detailed understanding of the war in the last era. Rather than saying that he was teaching the history of magic, it was more like he was teaching the history of modern wars. No matter how big or small the battles were, he could easily explain them. He was also very good at analyzing the meaning other than victory and defeat. However, between the lines, he always revealed his nostalgia for the war period and his preference for the life on the battlefield. Throughout his lectures, it was written that peace makes people corrupt. In any case, The students were very interested in the secret war stories that he would tell from time to time. Professor Hex would also try his best to answer the students' questions with humor. The overall atmosphere of this first magic history class was quite good. After the class, Professor Hex used his cane to support himself and limped out of the classroom. It wasn't until they saw his back that they suddenly remembered that Ryan Hux had left the battlefield as a loser. Which battle did Professor Harris lose in? Deanna leaned over and asked in a low voice. However, Dake was not an omniscient god. He could not just give the answer casually. However, Deanna showed a rare curiosity, so Dake took the opportunity and said, "If you are interested, you can go to the library and check it out." Deanna. Okay. After the holidays, something seemed to be missing in the library. When the students entered the library, they always felt a little uncomfortable. After a while, someone remembered that there was a scenery in front of the counter that was missing. Senior Panduola did not make it to the first day of school. Dake asked Ms. Bella, who was the librarian. However, Ms. Bella shook her head and only said that Panduola asked for leave and would be back by the end of the week. Since there was a fixed schedule, Dake was not worried anymore. His life was back on track, but he spent a lot less time in the library. After all, there were still magic conductors waiting for him in the dormitory. On the other hand, White and Luo Boat went to the library after class. They were not the only ones. Because the Duel Club was going to recruit new members this Friday afternoon, many students who were looking forward to it but could not meet the requirements yet started to cram. White and Luo Boat were among them. White still had hope, but Luo Boat was a little far behind. Fortunately, the Duel Club's recruitment would last for 3 weeks this semester. Among all the clubs in the school, the Duel Club was the only one that recruited first-year students. All the other clubs could only be joined by second-year students. After returning to the dormitory, Dake set aside an hour to teach the magic conductors. After thinking about it for a long time, he gave up on the idea of making Greed Eye. From the looks of it, Greed Eye, which only needed 1 point of greed to make, would not have any use outside of research. At least Greed 2 was needed to make it into the system. Therefore he decided to wait a little longer and wait for the 1.5 points of greed to be drawn before making Greed 2. In addition, the number of draws for this month had been determined. There were 15 points of great sins that could be drawn. They were Frowny Face Greed, 3 Pride, 9 Bliss, 3 inches addition to the 1 point of Pride from last month. It was just enough to make Greed 2, Pride 3, and Bliss 2. The creation of Greed 2 was for research. The creation of Pride 3 was necessary. The creation of Bliss 2 was still to be decided. It was mainly to lower the quota of Bliss, so it could be saved temporarily. As for the current topic, he would continue to focus on fusion, and also learn about Zoo. In short, before going to bed that night, he made Greed 2. Accidentally slept for 4.5 hours. Date half first. Chapter 227. Modo 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 Modo. Dake hurriedly grabbed the little fiend's wings with both hands to prevent it from pouncing on the little red flower in the drawer with a greedy expression. It was obviously meaningless to snatch the little red flower, but the little fiend's brain was already filled with naked greed. How could it think so clearly? On its forehead, the emblem representing greed was flashing. Pride's emblem was red, but after being refined into a card, it would be dark gold. Bliss's emblem was green, and after being refined into a card, it would be pink. Greed's emblem was purple, and after being refined into a card, it would be blue. Blue was originally the color of the sky, but Greed 2's blue had a dark hue, making people unable to help but feel greedy. Fairy Ibu. Me, Carat Omega Carat. As Fairy Ibu used her ribbon antennae to wrap the little fiend into a dumpling with only its head exposed, Dake finally freed his hands. 1 second to remember. https:// Vipkanshu. He picked up a pen and paper, and carefully observed the little fiend's forehead for a while, and then drew the emblem of Greed Great Sin. In the center of Greed's emblem was a seal that looked like a lock, and above the seal was the astronomical symbol of Saturn, an H symbol. The outer circle of the emblem was an English circle, level 666 system. Mammon code. Greed. Below the seal, in the inner circle of the emblem, were the words, caution. Purgatory level 5, outer circle, level 666 system. Mammon code. Greed. Inner circle, warning. Purgatory level 5. 15 minutes later, the little fiend returned to normal and was rewarded with a little red flower. An hour later, Greed 2's cooldown was over, and Dake called little Ibu. Having witnessed the whole process of the little fiend's humiliation, Ibu obediently lay in Dake's arms, sticking out its little tongue to lick its master's face, hoping that its master would be merciful. After all, Dake was only a demon god trainee. He immediately activated Greed 2, and shone it on Ibu. Ibu immediately licked even more happily. Under the effect of Greed 2, Ibu-chan was raised from 1 star to 2 star as expected. Card name, Magic Beast. Type, Elf card. Level, 00. Race, Bird. Attribute, Normal Magic Power, 500 Attack, 700 Defense, 300 Ultimate Skills. Imitation, Round Eyes, Desire. Constant Imitation, Greedy Round Eyes, Extreme Desire. Ultimate Skill, Round Pupil. Round Eyes. Ibu looks at his opponent with a greedy gaze, making his opponent feel restrained and reducing their desire to attack. Using different methods to achieve the same effect, perhaps this was the round pupil. Ultimate Skill, Desire. Desire. Act cute while attacking the opponent. You can also steal the opponent's items. Replacing Help from Pride 2 was Desire from Greed 2. It's actually Desire. Does that mean it changed from a nice monster to a 3-armed one? While Greed 2 was still active, Dake summoned the little fiends to cooperate with the experiment. Ibu used Desire. Ibu-chan immediately called out intimately to the little magical beast, then did the standard action of a Maneki Nico, and suddenly touched the little magical beast's body. The little fiends were stunned and felt a chill on the top of their head. Their beloved little hat had actually appeared in little Ibu's claws. Give it back to me. The little fiends instantly cried out and pounced on it. That's really amazing. Dake was overjoyed. As an attack skill, Desire's power was low, but it had an unexpected additional effect. The seize in the description of the ultimate skill wasn't really seizing, but a method to take things from a distance. This effect must have a limit. For example, if the opponent consciously grabbed it or used magic power to lock it, it would probably be very difficult to seize it. But on the other hand, as a magic guide elf, Ibu's Desire was very likely not only able to seize physical objects, but also seize items that were materialized from item cards. In order to verify this point, Dake took out an item that he hadn't used since he got it. Reveal powder. After the successful summoning, there was a small bottle of silver powder in his hand. By scattering or smashing this bottle of powder, it could make spirits or invisible objects within a small area reveal themselves. In the end, Ibu-chan touched him and obtained the reveal powder. Potions can be seized, but what about equipment, weapons, and even armors? Dake's thoughts suddenly became limitless. Ibu-chan's Desire skill gradually changed in his eyes and became a godly skill of stripping. Zin. Control. Control. No matter what, the creation of Greed 2 was undoubtedly a great success. After that, Dake used Greed 2 again before sleeping, but this time it targeted Trash Slime. As the only magic guide elf in the deck that didn't have much of its own thoughts, Dake was worried sick about it. However, Pride and Bliss series of Great Sin cards were almost useless against Trash Slime. For this reason, Dake specially searched for information about slimes in the library. Slimes were a very simple life form in nature, but their simple nature gave them great potential. It could be said that they were a life form that perfectly fit the Darwinian theory of evolution. Due to the influence of food, environment, genetics, and many other factors, The slimes would evolve according to the Darwinian theory of evolution, and develop many different types of slimes. Trash slime was one of these types of slimes. Slimes generally had three main characteristics, which were transformation, fusion, and devouring. Trash slime's specialty was the devouring characteristic. Therefore, among the 7 major sins, gluttony had the best compatibility with trash slime. The next one to wait would be greed before Kieran's eyes. Since gluttony couldn't be drawn yet, the greed series of great sin cards could be said to be the most promising. Hurry, hurry! The polymorph lay on the edge of the bed and carefully looked at its baby, hoping that it would become smarter. Magic Guide Summon. As the usual summoning spell was completed, Greed 2 released a pale blue light. The light gradually thickened and enveloped the trash slime. The trash slime that looked like a puddle of green slime at all times finally had some changes. Its body gradually swelled from slime to jelly, and the color of its body also changed from green to bluish green. Pew! Trash slime's card had also changed from 1 star to 2 star. Even the card name had changed. Chapter 228. Card name, Greedy Slime Eye. Type, Sprite card. Level, Race, Elemental type. Attribute, Grass. Magic power, 200. Attack, 0. Defense, 0. Ultimate skill, Treasure Sniffing. Treasure Sniffing. Greed from the root gives greedy slime a treasure sniffing ability that is different from ordinary people, but no treasure can satisfy its greed. First website. https://vipkanchu. Vipun ordinary blue card. And the only skill it had was still a passive skill. Its race and attributes had not changed at all. Its attack and defense were still 0. Only its magic power had increased by 100 with its level +1. This was Greedy Slime Eye. The ultimate greed, the ultimate trash. As expected of the advanced form of the trash slime, Dake stared at the only skill of the Greedy Slime Eye. Treasure Sniffing. He thought that if he had Greedy 2 earlier, would he have been able to avoid many detours when searching for the Valkyrie's treasure? Pew! The jelly-like blue-green slime bounced up from the bed with its extremely elastic body and pounced on Dake's face with a paw sound. Its unusually sensitive treasure-sniffing ability made it realize immediately. It had found the biggest treasure here. It's still the same cold touch, but it's more textured. Dake did not push it away immediately. The slime's body seemed to be sealed, but in fact, there was an oxygen cycle inside and it would not suffocate people. It was after turning into Greedy Slime Eye that the original strengthen stomach acid skill disappeared, so it lost the effect of the mask. Fortunately, this change could only last for 15 minutes. During this time, it could act spoiled as much as it wanted. 15 minutes later, as the effect of Greedy 2 completely disappeared, Greedy Slime Eye turned back into trash slime again, but the intelligence that had been activated would not disappear. However, Trash Slime's intelligence level was still around 2.5 for the time being. Although there was an improvement, it did not break through 3.0. This might be because its foundation was too weak. Or maybe it was because Greedy was not the best compatible with it. Although an intelligence level of 2.5 is not bad, it still can't keep up with the majority. Dake felt a little regretful. However, the Greedy Slime Eye with treasure sniffing was obviously a skill that everyone dreamed of outside of duels. I can't be greedy anymore. It was only after the multiform monster carried her baby back to bed that Dark closed his eyes and practiced the Nether Spirit spell for half an hour before naturally falling asleep. As the number of great sins that he could draw increased, his expectations for the Nether God spell also increased, and he became more diligent in his practice. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. As the first-grade magisters gradually adapted to life in the new semester, a gust of wind blew in the castle. Dake, have you heard? On Thursday night, Dake went to the library to finish his homework. Deanna leaned over and asked. He raised his head slightly, revealing a trace of doubt. Deanna chuckled and said proudly, "You don't know, do you? I heard that we are going to have a new professor." A new professor. Dake's gaze shifted. Tomorrow's magical beast professor. "No," Deanna said. "It's the astronomy professor." The astronomy professor. Dake frowned slightly. Astronomy was an interest class in the first grade, and it was originally taught by Dee. However, the current history of magic professor, Ryan Harkes, obviously did not have the ability to do that. Therefore, it was reasonable to hire a new astronomy professor. However, he heard that there was also an astronomy elective class in the upper grade. Was it because the upper grade astronomy professor was too busy to take over? This was possible. Originally, the professors of the Shangmalian Academy did not all work for the salary. Some professors worked for a place to stay, while others worked for the huge resources of the Shangmalian Academy. While they were teaching, they also had their own research projects. The lifespan of a human was limited. Not every professor could treat time as a game like Little Li. They needed to achieve their goals within a limited time. Once they gave it their all, they would feel that there was not enough time. After thinking about it, Dake asked, "Then, is there any news on which professor it will be?" Deanna shook her head fiercely. "I don't know, but I heard that it will be a sage." "Well, it could also be a prophet." Dake. "A sage or a prophet? I hope it's an official astrologer." Up until now, Dake had already discovered that the 7 deadly sins had a lot to do with the stars. However, astronomy was a very profound subject, and it was very slow to progress by self-study. Moreover, although this world had the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn and other planets, most of them only had a name, and did not completely match the characteristics of the planets in Dake's memory. Therefore, he had always been looking forward to the start of the astronomy class. However, in the entire last semester there was only one astronomy class. This was very unbearable. "I wonder who it will be." Dake was very excited. There were a few well-known astrologers in the kingdom. The Deputy City Lord of Sky City. The Tower Master of Star Tower. They were all authoritative figures in astrology. However, he thought that it could not be them. "Goo." Deanna puffed up her cheeks and thought for a while, then said, "By the way, will you participate in the Duel Club's recruitment tomorrow?" Dake nodded. "I'll go and take a look." Deanna was suddenly energized. "Okay, then I'll go too." After a semester of preparation, the basic requirement of 20 magic cards was not a problem for some students. Their problem was, among these 20 magic cards, how many of them were just to make up the numbers. However, for the first-year students, it was already very good to be able to gather 20 cards. If there were a few powerful magic cards among these 20 cards, then it would be natural for them to pass the Duel Club's recruitment test smoothly. To participate in the duel competition and win credits, joining the Duel Club was a prerequisite. Basically, by the second year, more than 80% of the students would join the Duel Club. Even if some of them did not like duels, no one could refuse credits, unless they really wanted to eat and die and then not graduate. Dake finished his homework before Deanna. After that, under Deanna's angry gaze, he resolutely left the library. There was still no familiar figure behind the counter in the library. It was unexpected that he felt a little uncomfortable. It's this time again. The moon seemed to be especially bright in the winter. Dake was walking on the way to the tower of the aristocrat's house. He happened to meet Professor Hex, who was wandering around, so he casually greeted him. "Good evening, Professor." "It's the dimming." Ryan Hex turned his head. He did not have a bad impression of Dake just because he was the son of the Dove faction's leader. Dake curiously asked, "Professor Hex, where are you going so late at night?" Hex touched his beard and smiled. "I just came here. Since I have some free time at night, I want to familiarize myself with the castle." His prosthetic limb was made of a magic device. It was similar to the limbs of a golem, but it was relatively simple. Moreover, the surface was old and there were a lot of repair marks. According to his current situation, It would be very difficult for him to maintain the prosthetic limbs' repair costs. As for familiarizing himself with the castle, it was reasonable. However, it was a little scary to walk in the dark castle like this. Dake thought for a bit and said, "Professor Hex, if you need to repair the prosthetic limb, Professor Causair might be able to help." Hex paused for a second before he smiled happily and said, "I already talked to him. When I get this month's salary, I'll get a new pair." Dake, "That's good. Professor, I'll go back to the dorm first." Hex, Go. After Dake walked on the bridge to the tower of the aristocrat's house, Hex suddenly stopped smiling and looked around. The Shangmalian castle was bigger than he expected and full of mysteries. After 2 nights of walking around, not only did he not find the way, but he also felt more and more confused. "I don't know where the entrance to the castle is. Maybe I should ask 1 or 2 students." Hex looked around again before he limped away. It was only after Hex had gradually left that a small bee with a face flew out from the shadows in a wobbly manner. Ducky opened the window and let Little Bee, who had circled around to the balcony, in. The little bee, which was the size of a knuckle, suddenly expanded and stuck to his face with a plop sound. He quickly pulled the bee off his face and said, "Why are you learning to be a slime? You're not breathing." "I'm busy." The bee wriggled. Dake asked, "Did Professor Hex do anything?" The bee shook its head and nodded. Then it formed a mouth and imitated the shape of Hark's mouth as it said something. Dark repeated the words according to the shape of its mouth. He wanted to read its lips, but he failed. Without professional skills, it was actually quite difficult to read the other party's words from the shape of their lips. However, the bee quickly imitated each word. Dake interpreted each word and slowly pieced it together into a sentence. "I don't know where the entrance to the castle is. Maybe I should ask 1 or 2 students." Is that the right tone? "I'm busy." That's strange. He doesn't seem to be afraid to talk about the secret passage. Dake rubbed his chin and thought like a detective. Since he recovered his memory, he had gradually integrated into the environment. He had less and less associated this world with the game. Plus, he wasn't familiar with the game. He could only guess the development based on his understanding of Harry Potter. However, the plot of the Shangmalian Super XX Academy was just an imitation of Harry Potter. If he blindly used Harry Potter as a reference, there would be a lot of mistakes. Plus, with his arrival, the plot must have changed drastically. Therefore, he had already started to think outside of the fixed plot. However, there was one thing that didn't change much. That was, from the 1st grade to the 6th grade there was a series of events. Every school year there would be more or less big events. The Shangmalian Academy was the big stage for events. Everyone who entered the Shangmalian Academy was like an actor on stage. They would eventually dance under the spotlight. However, there were roles in the light and in the dark. In such a big environment, Dake only wanted to be a spectator. He wanted to sit in a safe and worry-free room, put on a plate of pastries, make a cup of black tea, and watch leisurely. However, his strength didn't allow him to do so. But then again, had the big event of the 1st grade happened yet? Was the Moon Goddess incident considered a big event? Was the vampire incident considered a big event? A Professor Ryan Hux took the initiative to get involved in this mess. Could it be the initiator of a new event? However, didn't Claire also become a professor for 2 months and nothing happened? Therefore, this was actually a false proposition. He should still look at it with a normal attitude. At most, he should pay more attention to it in his daily life. Dake carefully pondered for a while before he extracted today's pride. Adding the stock from last month and yesterday, he had a total of 4 points of pride. In 4 more days, he could start refining Pride 3. He was looking forward to it. Whether it was research or daily life, it seemed to be getting more and more interesting. The next day, Friday, the temperature dropped to freezing point, and the lake leading to Traveler Street was frozen with a layer of ice. When Dake was running in the morning, he could see someone dancing on the ice through the castle window. The distance was relatively far, and the lake was shrouded in a layer of mist. He couldn't see who it was, but he could vaguely make out the graceful swan-like body. It reminded him of the main character of the stage play Swan Lake at the Christmas ball. Today is a good sign. Dake was in a good mood because he saw something good. He returned to the dormitory and sat on the balcony to eat breakfast while opening the Great Sage Daily. He found that the condemnation of the saint in the newspaper suddenly disappeared. It seems that the princess's side has compromised. I just don't know how much the saint paid to quell the impact of this incident. He closed his eyes and thought about it. He felt that this matter was not over yet. The first class on Friday was a duel class. At the end of the class, Professor Cheong-si specifically talked about the rules of the duel club's recruitment. However, before the duel club's recruitment in the afternoon, there was a new class for the first graders. Warcraft. As a class that had already appeared in the class schedule last semester, Warcraft hadn't been taught yet. The first graders hadn't even seen the Warcraft professor before, so it could be considered a new class. New classes, new professors, and new knowledge. Boys were often interested in all kinds of strange Warcraft, while girls avoided it. The mood before the class was polarized. Of course, there were also girls like Deanna who were so excited that they jumped for joy. 2 in 1 4,000. Chapter 229. First-year Magical Beasts was an experiential class. There were no teaching materials for the time being, so there was no way to prepare for it. Dake propped his chin on his hand and looked at the scenery outside the window, bored to death. Only when the bell rang did he turn his head back. But the Magical Beasts professor hadn't arrived yet. Students from the 4 faculties sat in 4 rows in the spacious lecture hall. Most of the students had already stopped making noise when the bell rang, but there was still a small group of people who were laughing and joking. It wasn't until a few minutes later that a large body covered in gray fur forced its way through the front door of the lecture hall that the noise in the lecture hall abruptly stopped. Whoosh! As the large body squeezed through the door, a strong wind blew in with it. A strong smell carried by the wind to every corner of the lecture hall. However, it wasn't the stench that gave people the impression of a giant beast. Instead, it was a strong fragrance, like the strange smell of all kinds of flowers mixed together. The students' expressions changed slightly. Remember the URL, Vipkanshu. Even Dake, who was sitting in the last row, couldn't escape the attack of the mixed flower fragrance. Just like all the other magisters, he also subconsciously covered his nose. Then the giant beast turned its face and greeted the students. Good morning, everyone. Oh no, it bit its tongue. Bit its tongue. It bit its tongue. It bit its tongue. Faced with the whispers of doubt from the entire class, a faint pink cloud quietly appeared on the giant beast's rough cheeks. Its eyes began to wander, its hands began to move, and its entire body curled up, abruptly becoming smaller. Even so, it was still abnormally large. Even Professor Pawa Cheong-si, who had 1/16 of the giant bloodline, would look like a child standing in front of it. However, completely different from its appearance, its words and actions were even more childish than a child's. Its voice was soft like a baby's voice. This made some of the frightened little girls quietly breathe a sigh of relief. Ai Ma, who was sitting in the front row, suddenly raised her hand. Perhaps she felt that the giant beast wouldn't care about her, so she spoke up herself. "Excuse me, are you the professor of magical beasts?" Yes. The giant beast hurriedly nodded and looked at Ai Ma with eyes full of gratitude. "I am the professor of magical beasts, Nini." Ai Ma gathered her courage and asked, "Professor Nini, are you a mixed-blood orc?" Professor Nini frowned slightly and said softly, Yes. He's a mixed blood of the behemoth tribe." Behemoth mixed blood. Behemoths were royal beastmen. As soon as Professor Nini finished speaking, there were more whispers in the classroom. Professor Cheong-si was a hybrid of the giant royal tribe, and Professor Nini was a hybrid of the beastman royal tribe. They really had the style of a Shangmalian. However, unlike Professor Cheong-si, whose bloodline was mostly human, Professor Nini's bloodline was obviously more orc. She looked like a behemoth without horns and fangs. Other than her more delicate facial features, there were no human features at all. Moreover, she seemed to be quite young. While everyone was puzzled, Professor Nini walked to the podium nervously. After putting the small bag on her back on the table, she finally raised her head and said, "Then, let me introduce myself again. I am a professor of magical beasts. Nini, this is my first time teaching." "No, but..." Just as the little magisters were puzzled, Professor Nini's voice suddenly seeped into a terrifying beast's roar. "I will work hard." The power of 10,000 beasts suppressed the entire classroom. Everyone was silent. Professor Nini didn't notice it at all. She was still talking to herself. "So, please don't tell Auntie Ertii that I'm not serious or anything. Otherwise I will cry. And get angry." She opened her hands and wanted to say, "Wow," subconsciously, but then she seemed to have thought of something and quickly closed her mouth. Then, she straightened her back and looked below the podium. The students below the podium looked very serious. Then, this self-introduction should be a success, right? As Nini thought of this, she swallowed her saliva and was filled with anxiety. The back of the lecture hall was on higher ground. Dake looked down from above, but his mouth was half open and his face was full of speechlessness. The power of the beast that Professor Nini inadvertently released was of course not effective on him, but the students who saw it were mostly frightened and didn't recover until the power of the beast disappeared. "So, she is the first-year professor of magical beasts. Can I report the Shangmalian Academy to the Education Bureau for employing child labor? This Professor Nini doesn't look like a sane person. Can she really teach this class well?" The tense atmosphere in the lecture hall gradually eased until Professor Nini officially started the class. Because she didn't have a textbook, she couldn't follow the textbook. This was actually a great test of her foundation. Moreover, her courage was obviously inversely proportional to her height. She stuttered when speaking, not to mention giving a good lecture. She used about 15 minutes to explain the general idea of magical beasts. The first-year magical beasts mainly focused on understanding some common magical beasts. In order to deepen their understanding, the professors would occasionally bring the students into the dungeons for temporary experience. In short, it was not a profound class. If it was really too profound, it would not be the turn of this fledgling Professor Nini. After finishing her lecture, Professor Nini plucked up her courage and asked like the other professors, "Does anyone know what a magical beast is?" But just as she finished asking, Ai Ma in the first row had already raised her hand. Professor Nini reached out and pointed at her, then pulled out a small list with her fingertips and whispered, "Ai Ma Métis?" "Yes, Professor, you can call me Ai Ma," Emma said confidently. Also, the so-called magical beasts are actually the literal meaning of wild beasts that possess magic power. Professor Nini nodded and said, "That's right, but it's not complete. Can anyone add to it?" "Not." "Okay, the student in the last row, please stand up and answer the question." "Name." "Luo Boat Broheim." Under the surprised gaze of the surrounding people, Luo Boat slowly stood up. There was a trace of blankness on his face, but he spoke very smoothly. "Imai's right. The so-called magical beast can be explained literally, but not all beasts with magic power can be called magical beast. In fact, spirit beasts, phantom beasts, mythical beasts, and even some magical animals also have magic power. The original meaning of the word magical beast should be a beast that has been demonized. The demons with the ability to demonize beasts gathered into an army after demonizing them and wantonly slaughtered them. They are the creations of the demons, evil beasts without rationality. Even some mutated demons who have lost their rationality are classified as magical beasts. Of course, that's already a thing of the past. After countless years of reproduction, the magical beasts have already formed a new race. Add 5 points to Luo Boat. Professor Nini excitedly raised her hands and clapped her 2 giant palms. Then she asked again, "Did you add it?" Luo Boat received the additional points in his branch card and nodded awkwardly. Only then did Professor Nini continue her lecture happily. But in her heart, she already had a good impression of this not-so-smart boy. Sure enough, you can't judge a book by its cover. Is this the legendary top student? After Luo Boat sat down, White finally couldn't help but ask, Luo Boat, where did you learn this? Even I don't know this knowledge. Luo Boat was at a loss. I don't know either, it's like I already knew. White. Luo Boat frowned and racked his brain. Did I hear it from someone before? White. Don't you often run to the barracks? Maybe the veterans told you something. Luo Boat. Maybe, but it felt really good. White. Ah. Luo Boat's sudden enthusiasm didn't attract much attention. After all, not many people knew him well, and everyone had their own strengths. Perhaps he happened to know this knowledge. As for Professor Nini's lecture, it was actually quite boring. However, when the students saw such a big guy using his childish voice and trying his best to impart some knowledge, they unexpectedly felt that it was interesting. In the middle of the lecture, Professor Nini suddenly took out a jar from her small bag and said excitedly, For today's lecture I went to the dungeon to catch a magical beast. Today's main topic is the explanation of this magical beast. Everyone, listen carefully because today's homework is to write a small paper about this magical beast. Then she muttered softly. Auntie Shierfu said that homework must be given after class. Ma and the others in the front row heard it clearly, and a few of their faces darkened. Professor Nini was obviously very happy when she talked about this topic. She picked up the jar with 2 fingers and shook her head vigorously. Then she leaned close to her ear and said, It's still alive. Then she said happily, Can anyone guess what kind of magic beast is in the jar? I can give you a hint. It's very common in the dungeon, but it's also very dangerous. After she finished speaking, she stared at the students below the stage, occasionally glancing in Robert's direction. But this time, let alone Luo Boat, even the students who were familiar with magical beasts were dumbfounded. There were too many magical beasts in the dungeon, and every one of them was very dangerous. Professor Nini was terrifyingly naive. Is she dumber than me? Even Deanna was doubtful. Luo C quickly nudged her arm and whispered, You can't say that, Professor. Deanna. Okay. Professor Nini waited for a long time, but no one raised his hand. Her 2 thick eyebrows were about to collapse. She was pitiful, helpless, and wanted to cry. Suddenly, her eyes lit up when she saw someone raise his hand in the last row by the window. The golden-haired young man stood up with a helpless expression after being pointed out. Dake Dimming. I know you. Professor Nini said excitedly. Okay, I know you know me. Dake had to remind her. Professor Nini, you should give more hints. There are too many magical beasts in the dungeon. If you're referring to the magical beasts that newbies often encounter, such as the mud monster, then its strong body odor is a good hint. If you're referring to another magical beast, such as the monster-sucking monster, then its ability to absorb mana will make people think of it more easily. Professor Nini blinked her eyes hard. That seems to be the case. Dake saw that she seemed to understand, so he sat down. Professor Nini. Then, the new hint is that it can make people despair. The classroom was silent. After all, if one encountered danger in the dungeon, even a magical beast could make people despair. Professor Nini looked at the students below the stage expectantly, but no one raised their hand. Her eyebrows furrowed again. Dake had to save the situation again. Professor Nini, is that the monster-sucking monster in the jar, the monster-sucking monster? Thank you. Professor Nini seemed to have grasped at a life-saving straw and quickly said, 5 points for Dake Dimming. Then she picked up the jar and opened it with force. In an instant, a gray shadow flew out from the jar. Professor Nini casually grabbed its tail and pulled it hard, then slammed it on the table with a thud. The monster-sucking monster, who was almost flattened, raised its head dizzily and let out a sharp cry. It was the excitement of seeing food, and the craziness of smelling delicious food. The monster-sucking monster was gray all over like a ghost. On its twisted face, there were 3 black holes that could never be filled. They were greedy and despicable, and they would suck away all happiness, leaving behind endless despair. Dake had looked up related information in order to solve the problem of the great sin. However, the monster-sucking monster didn't absorb emotions, but memories. It sucked away happy memories, and then poured in terrible memories in the form of nightmares, making people despair and die in their sleep. This was the monster-sucking monster. Does anyone want to give it a try? Therefore, when Professor Nini said this, Dake was surprised. Don't be afraid. A monster-sucking monster alone can't suck away memories very well. Besides, even if the memories are really sucked away, as long as you squeeze the monster-sucking monster's abdomen like this, you can squeeze them out. Professor Nini said these bold words in a timid tone, then demonstrated by lifting the monster-sucking monster's body upside down, and using 2 fingers to pinch its tail. She stroked it from the tip of its tail to the tip of its mouth. The soul-sucking monster let out a shriek as it was flattened into a thin piece. However, when she let go, it swelled up again. Professor Nini shook the monster-sucking monster and said, "Monster-sucking monsters are very common magical beasts in the underground city. They are very dangerous but also very fragile. Especially when they are sucking memories. They are defenseless and can be taken away with a single slash. Experiencing the feeling of having your memories sucked away in advance is beneficial for you to deal with them calmly when you encounter them." Her words did make some sense. However, in this situation even the students of the night college. Oh my God, someone really raised his hand. It's him, it's him, it's him. Among the humans, there was no lack of courageous warriors who sought death. White Gouda. Let's welcome the hero's son to the stage. Pa 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 pa. 2 in 1/4/100. Chapter 230. Under everyone's gaze, White took a deep breath and walked out of his seat. During this period of time after joining the church, his stress had been vented, and his mentality had also recovered a little. In addition, the members of the church were basically seniors who were older than him. Although they had psychological problems, each of them was better than the other when it came to teaching. Under their psychological guidance, White gradually realized where his problem was. He was too lacking in subjective ability. Being too passive was the main reason why he failed to succeed in the last semester. At the beginning of the semester, he passively accepted the convenience brought about by his identity. When he was sought after by all the students in the school as the hero's son, although he didn't show it on the surface, his mentality was already floating. After that, he didn't take the initiative to maintain this convenience, nor did he make himself more suitable for this identity. On the contrary, he became less and less like a good student when he was with Luo Boat. Halfway through, he reflected a little, but mistakenly blamed his failure on Luo Boat's influence. Remember, https://vipcanshu. VIP. Although the influence did exist after all, a person's environment did make them different. But the main reason was that he didn't take the initiative enough. He didn't reflect more on himself, but subconsciously passed the blame, as if he would have become serious and diligent without the existence of Luo Boat. Actually, it wasn't. At the end of the day, all of this was caused by his own personality. Since he was born, he had never really taken the initiative to fight for anything. He had always been going with the flow. Even if there was a time when he set Dake as a goal and wanted to catch up with him and surpass him, in fact, he didn't put in enough effort. If there was any real initiative, it was probably only the adventure of treasure hunting. And now it was time to change. A new semester, a new atmosphere, was the opportunity. He had to take the initiative to attack and fight for it. Whether it was grades, victories, or the people he liked. Change himself starting from today. White walked to the podium under everyone's gaze. His thin body stood in the shadow of Professor Nini, but he suddenly felt a little scared. The feeling of sitting in a seat might not be so clear, but when one was really beside Professor Nini, one would find that she was actually so huge. And the toy-like little jar in her hand was actually half the height of a person. As for the soul-sucking monster that she could manipulate at will, White couldn't help but swallow his saliva, and his throat swelled slightly. "Is it this big?" Professor Nini looked at White in front of her with joy. Of course, she knew this hero's son. Seeing that he was a little scared, she hurriedly said, "Don't be afraid. The spirit-absorbing monster won't bite." "Was I afraid that it would bite?" White's face darkened, but her nervousness was unexpectedly relieved. The soul-sucking monster, on the other hand, smelled the scent of a human child and pounced on him with bared fangs. The black hole on its face rotated inwards, looking even deeper as if it wanted to suck everything in. However, Professor Nini grabbed its tail tightly, making it unable to touch the White no matter how hard it tried. White was scared, but since he was on the stage, he couldn't back down. He raised his head, closed his eyes, and gritted his teeth. Come on. There was a saying that life was like being stared at by a crazy woman. Since he couldn't resist, he had to learn to enjoy it. As his eyelids closed, his vision was invaded by darkness, and his heart gradually calmed down. Standing on the podium, White suddenly remembered that when he had just arrived at the academy, he had also stood on the stage in the auditorium in front of all the students and received their cheers. That was probably the second happiest moment in his life. The happiest person was, of course, cracking the hero's secret treasure and obtaining the Holy Sword curse. When was that? White suddenly opened his eyes. He only saw a gray blur in front of his eyes, and he could only vaguely see the shadows of the soul-sucking monster and Professor Nini. His entire face looked like it was being pulled outwards by something. It didn't hurt, but he felt a little suffocated. Is this the feeling of being sucked by a soul-sucking monster? Surprisingly, it's not that scary. It's not that desperate. Speaking of desperate, White suddenly covered his chest, and his breathing became more and more difficult. His chest was so stuffy that it felt like it was blocked by lead. Something was coming. His intuition for danger came into play again, and he subconsciously raised his hands. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. Patter. The soul-sucking monster was pulled away in time. Only when he felt the wind in his face did Werther realize that his back was already cold. The students in the audience saw it more directly. Just now, the ghost-like soul-sucking monster jumped in front of White, and the black hole in its mouth suddenly opened. Then, a bubble-like gray substance was pulled out of White's face. The soul-sucking monster bit the gray bubble and desperately pulled it out, as if it was pulling the soul out of a person's brain, which was terrifying. During this process, black threads gradually overflowed from the black hole in the soul-sucking monster's eyes and reached for White's head like tentacles. Also at that moment, Professor Nini suddenly grabbed the soul-sucking monster's head and squeezed hard, making its mouth open. Then she pulled again and pulled it away. The memory that was no longer controlled by the soul-sucking monster naturally returned to White's brain. White regained his consciousness. The whole process seemed to be safe, but that was because everything was under Professor Nini's control, and there was only one soul-sucking monster at the scene. The soul-sucking monsters in the dungeon always came in groups. To deal with the soul-sucking monster effectively, in addition to relying on companions, one must have a strong mind that could quickly recover from the confusion when happy memories were being sucked away. After having the experience of having memories being sucked away, it was easier to recover from the confusion. Therefore, before coming into contact with a dungeon, this level of experience training was necessary. How do you feel? Professor Nini opened her eyes wide and looked at White, hoping that this brave student would answer. It's not a big deal. Then she could lure the students one by one. Hey, how could it be a lure? It was a normal experience. However, White felt cold all over. The sudden return of the memory made him realize what he had lost just now. He stood there for a long time, and then under Professor Nini's anxious gaze he said, "Not very good." Professor Nini's face fell as soon as he said this. But White didn't notice. When being sucked away by the soul-sucking monster, The best things will flow out of your mind without you noticing. You won't even realize that you've lost it. But that's the scariest thing. If the soul-sucking monster sucking wasn't interrupted, you might really lose it forever. Is it that scary? Professor Nini lifted the soul-sucking monster in front of her eyes and shook it, not quite understanding. But White had already pulled himself together. So we can't underestimate the soul-sucking monster. If we have the chance to enter the dungeon, we must be careful. B. Professor Nini curled her lips. 5 points for White Gouda. Is there anyone else who wants to come up and experience it? There are bonus points. But the students looked at each other, and no one responded. White walked all the way down the aisle and finally returned to his seat. Luo Boat quickly asked, "Is it really that scary? That soul-sucking monster?" White still had a lingering fear. "If you don't believe me, you can go and experience it. With Professor Nini here, at least you'll be safe." Luo Boat shook his head like a rattledrum. "Of course I believe you." The hero's son's words still had some credibility. Professor Nini looked at the students anxiously and was once again in a predicament. If it were any other professor, they would definitely directly ask a student to come up and experience it, or just line up and try it one by one. But Professor Nini obviously didn't have the confidence. She could only ask for help from Ai Ma and Dake, who had helped her many times. Ai Ma was sitting in the first row, and naturally became the best person to ask for help. But Ai Ma was only a 12-year-old girl after all. If it was something else, it wouldn't be a big deal. This soul-sucking monster's appearance as it sucked in memories was too horrifying. What was wrong with girls being afraid of the dark and ghosts? Taking the initiative to experience it. That was impossible. Ai Ma shook her head even harder than Luo Boat. The other girls weren't much better than her. As soon as Professor Nini's gaze swept over them, the girls subconsciously shrank their bodies, afraid of being called by her. Of course the boys were better, but their instinct to seek benefits and avoid harm made them not raise their hands. In the end, who would want to experience this kind of thing for no reason? Professor Nini should be more forceful, put on the airs of a professor, and order them to come up with an unquestionable tone. Slowly, Professor Nini's gaze swept past the front row and looked at Luo Boat in the last row, but Luo Boat, whom she had high hopes for, quickly lowered his head and pretended not to know anything. Professor Nini puffed up her cheeks and looked at her last hope. Dake blinked. Professor Nini, who had no way to ask for help, was like a small animal, reminding him of the magic elves and catnip plants in the dormitory. As for responding to Professor Nini's expectations, it was not that he didn't dare to go up, but he was afraid that the soul suckers wouldn't dare to suck. "How about Deanna, you go and try?" Deanna shook her head violently. "It's so disgusting," Dake reasoned. "You have to experience it. The soul suckers move silently, and it's hard to avoid them in the underground city. But their bodies are fragile. As long as you experience that feeling in advance, you won't be easily fascinated and can come back to your senses as soon as possible. Well, then you can slap it to death." Deanna smacked her lips and was a little reluctant, but she was always very obedient. "'Kay then." Professor Nini was pleasantly surprised to see that another person raised her hand. Deanna walked to the podium and observed Professor Nini closely. She found that Professor Nini's thighs were thicker than her whole body. But such a huge beast had a timid and sensitive heart like a small animal. She had a natural affinity with beasts and could vaguely feel something that others couldn't. "Professor, you can start now." Deanna didn't close her eyes like White, but opened her eyes wide and looked at the soul sucker. She wanted to see this soul sucker suck out her memories and then take a good look at the color of her memory bubbles. Should be pink, right? It can't be gray like White, right? That would be so ugly. Suddenly, her expression changed and she saw the soul sucker pouncing on her. She wasn't afraid, but she felt disgusted. The soul sucker suddenly stopped in front of her and stared at her with its black hole-like eyes. Then, Deanna saw the soul sucker suddenly open its mouth and suck in air. Without realizing it, something was being sucked out from her face. Those things condensed into gray bubbles and were sucked into the soul sucker's mouth, gradually elongating and changing shape. "It's still gray," Deanna said with some disappointment. The soul sucker suddenly looked sluggish, and then, as if it was humiliated, it suddenly screamed. The black hole vortex in its eyes suddenly accelerated, and the suction force in its mouth suddenly exploded, and its whole head tilted back. The gray memory bubble suddenly became bigger and bigger, bigger and bigger. However, Deanna just looked at the bubble curiously and didn't feel anything at all. As the only pearl in the Great Bear family, she grew up happily under the care of the family elders since she was born. There were just too many happy memories in her head. With the size of the soul sucker, it was impossible for it to absorb all of them. Such a small amount of memory bubbles was just a drop in the ocean for her. Ah! The soul sucker seemed to be angry out of humiliation, and the black threads that overflowed from its eyes suddenly grabbed Deanna's head. These black threads would replace the empty memories and create desperate nightmares. However, Deanna's eyes flickered, and she suddenly jumped up and slapped it hard. Slap! A huge force suddenly came from the soul sucker's cheek, and its whole head was smashed into a pancake. The memory bubble that was sucked into its mouth popped out and flowed back into Deanna's brain just like that. Deanna rubbed the soul sucker's head happily and said excitedly, "So weak. White. Luo boat. Ai ma. Boy. Girl. Poor soul sucker." Fell into the bear's paw. It was so painful that it wanted to die. Deanna Great Bear, awesome bonus points. Professor Nini lifted the soul sucker upside down again, and happily added points to Deanna. Deanna laughed and said, "It's not that awesome." Her performance finally made the students less afraid of the soul sucker. Ai Ma, who had rejected Deanna before, gritted her teeth. She thought that if Deanna could do it, there was no reason that she couldn't, so she braced herself and went up to the stage to experience it. Although her face was a little pale when she returned to her seat, she still recorded the feeling of this experience very well. Then, more and more students gathered their courage to go up to the stage to experience it. The soul sucker sucked the delicious food into its mouth again and again, and was forced to spit it out again and again. However, it was still strong and unyielding, and moved forward bravely. Finally, with a boom sound, it exploded. 2 in 1, 4,000 words. Looking for votes. Looking for votes. Looking for votes. Chapter 231. The explosion of the monster was obviously beyond Professor Nini's expectation. Doran, who was on the stage at that time, was so scared that he almost peed his pants. Fortunately, the explosion of the monster was not very powerful. It was more like a balloon than a gas tank. Doran was only blown to the ground by the blast of the explosion. But Professor Nini panicked and quickly reached out to support him. "Are you okay?" Doran was even more scared. Professor Nini's expression froze, and her outstretched hand stopped in the air. She slowly retracted her hand and carefully looked down the stage, only to find that the students all looked lucky. No one blamed her for not being cautious enough. "Phew, it's okay, it's okay." Professor Nini patted her chest and breathed a sigh of relief. Website. https://vipcanchu. Seeing that it was a false alarm, Dake, who had just subconsciously stood up, sat down again. Then he heard Luo Boat on the other side shouting, "Hey, why did it explode? I wanted to experience it." The few boys in front of him also chimed in. "That's right. You didn't even give us a chance. You made us look like cowards." As soon as this topic was brought up, similar voices spread out uncontrollably. Those students who didn't dare to go on stage to experience it suddenly spoke up. Professor Nini blinked and said delightedly, "Really? Then I'll catch another one in the next class." The classroom was silent for a moment. But then those students who had already experienced it laughed out loud. The atmosphere that had been shocked by the explosion suddenly disappeared without a trace. Only Professor Nini showed a puzzled expression. She didn't understand what they were laughing about. But after a while, the bell rang to signal the end of class. She panicked and quickly assigned the week's homework. Anyway, that's it. After class, everyone has to write a small paper about soul suckers. Hand it in by next Wednesday at noon. Hand it in. AI Ma helplessly raised her hand. Professor, I can help to collect it. Professor Nini quickly said. Then give it to AI Ma. Let AI Ma send it to my office. It's next to Aunt Shi Erfu's office. That was it. Professor Nini's first lecture was finally over. She packed her bag and walked briskly out of the classroom through the front door. When she was a little further away, the students in the classroom gradually began to discuss. Before this class, no one would have thought that the professor of magical beasts would be a mixed-blood behemoth. But you have to say it's quite interesting. And it's not scary at all. I'm super brave. I'm really looking forward to next week's magical beast study. I wonder what kind of magical beast Professor Nini will bring. If only she could be a little cuter. Professor Nini unexpectedly received good reviews. Dake stayed in the classroom for a while and found that the students had a good impression of the new professor. He could not help but smile. Perhaps it was because he had raised so many small animals, but now when he saw those clumsy and hard-working children, he always wanted to take care of them. He wasn't originally like this. Dake, let's go. Deanna patted her belly, indicating that she was starving. Only then did Dake pick up his bag and turn to leave. After the magical beast study ended, it was Friday afternoon. The opening of Traveler Street was secondary. The most important thing was the recruitment of the Duel Club. Every Friday afternoon at the beginning of every semester was the time for the Duel Club to recruit new members. It was not only open to the first years, but also the entire academy. Of course, the senior students who wanted to join the Duel Club had already done so. The overall target of recruitment was still the first and second years. Dake and the other two found a place to sit down in the cafeteria. They talked about the Duel Club as they ate lunch. Deanna seemed very excited. I've asked around. As long as you join the Duel Club, you can sign up for the Saturday morning newbie competition every Friday. You can get 200 credits for every win. Once you have credits, you can buy whatever you want. Dake had to remind her. You need to pay credits to sign up for the competition. The newbie competition has a 50% discount, but you still need 50 credits to sign up. Of course, the higher the level of the duel competition, the higher the reward. Diana muttered. Pay 50 credits, win 200 credits, net profit 150 credits, win 1 round and lose 3 rounds. Is that right? Dake said. That's right. You can get 10 credits for every win. Course, 10 credits will also be deducted if you lose. After you break 100 credits, you can apply for promotion. If you win 3 promotion matches in a row, you can advance to a higher level competition. Deanna said. So, as long as you win 10 games and pass the promotion match, you can participate in other competitions even if you are not a third year? Dake nodded and said. That makes sense. But winning 10 games is not as easy as you think. Deanna said, I know. After all, in the newbie competition, most of the second years were second years. After signing up for the newbie competition, there was a high chance that you would be matched with a second-year student. And among the second years, there was no lack of strong people like Senior Mary. And if you lost one of the 3 promotion matches, you would have to start from scratch again. Every year, there were countless students who failed miserably in the tribulation matches. If you didn't have the strength to surpass this level, it would be very difficult to advance. But in general, the credit reward system of the duel competition was relatively lax for students. As long as you could maintain a 50% winning rate, you could get a lot of credits as a reward. Of course, there was no lack of people who were so unlucky that they lost so much that they lost even their underwear. Today was a special day. Most of the students in the cafeteria were excitedly talking about the Duel Club's recruitment. Although it was not as grand as a festival, it was still a big event in Shangmalian. The Duel Club was the only club in Shangmalian Academy that was managed by the school. It was independent of the student union, literature club, astronomy club, magic chess club, and other student organizations. It was the only club that could be joined. Every Shangmalian club could register a team in the duel club. The strength of the club's team was the main criterion to evaluate a club. This involved the competition for research resources and the application for club funds. Once there was a dispute between clubs, it also needed to be settled through a duel. Therefore, if a club wanted to be big and strong, it was necessary to form a strong team. For this reason, every time the duel club recruited new members, many clubs would send people to investigate, hoping to recruit the most promising seedlings from among them. At the beginning of every school year, it was the best opportunity for clubs to understand the potential of the new students. Moreover, this year's lineup of new students was especially strong. Whether it was the hero's son, the Valkyrie's son, the sage of the ancients, the bear of the kingdom, or the successor of the house of Dolan, everyone was looking forward to it. After Diana ate a few mouthfuls of noodles, she turned to Luosi. "You really don't want to try?" Luosi quickly shook his head. "No, I can't do it. The duel club is too difficult for me. I'll be your cheerleader." Diana replied with an "oh," and ate a few more mouthfuls of noodles. She definitely wanted to be with Luosi, but since Luosi didn't like it, she couldn't force him. She heard that even in the 6th grade, there were still people who didn't join the duel club, and their grades weren't bad. It was understandable that some people didn't like duels or weren't good at it. But she was still a bit disappointed. Luosi smiled. "Don't be like that. When the time comes, you'll have to work hard to charge forward with me." Diana. "Charge, charge, charge." Not far next door, Dolan and the little fatty Pittan were sitting together. The two of them had the same steak in front of them. Dolan cut the steak with the standard posture of a noble, while Pittan wolfed it down without a care, his mouth full of juice. After wiping the juice from the corner of his mouth with a napkin, Pittan muttered, "How are your preparations, Dolan?" Dolan shook his head. "Not too good." Pittan. "Don't always compare yourself to Dake, you're already very good." Dolan. "People can't always look down on others." Pittan. "Hey, when you say look down on others, are you referring to me?" Dolan. "You even found out." Pittan. "Hee, I think so. It's more practical to use white as your opponent. Look, he's the son of a hero." Dolan. "The son of a hero isn't a hero." Pittan. "But the prophets all say that the day the Devil King revives is the day the hero reappears. The outside world is saying that the Devil King is about to revive." Dolan. "Are you talking about that group of liars?" Pittan. "Don't say that, some prophets are still very reliable." Dolan. "Of course there are." Bit further away, Ima was sitting with two girls. They were Susan and Lucy. They always sat on either side of Ima in class. Susan had a natural smile on her face and loved to smile. Every time she smiled, two deep dimples would appear. Lucy was more old-fashioned. She had short hair and didn't usually talk, but when she did, she couldn't stop talking and was very talkative. After a semester of interaction, the three of them had formed a small circle. Susan ate the strawberries she stole from Lucy's plate and said happily, "Ai Ma, when you join the duel club, don't forget about us." Ai Ma shook her head slightly. "Not yet. Professor Cheong-si said that just having 20 magic cards isn't enough. I need to prove myself in a duel." Susan. "Is it a duel between newcomers? For us Ai Ma, it's not a big deal." Lucy looked up and deliberately pretended to be Ai Ma's voice. "Watch my performance this afternoon." Ai Ma. She liked these two new friends very much, but their occasional teasing made her feel a little overwhelmed. On the other side, White and Luo Boat didn't go to the cafeteria to eat. They went straight to the lab after class. This was because Victor still needed one more magic card to make up the number of 20. As for Luo Boat, although he inexplicably wanted to join the duel club, he couldn't keep up with the number of magic cards, so he could only give up. Other than them, Saraswati and Heidi from the School of Magic, Justin Wayne from the School of Knights, and the top students from the School of Fools. Quite a number of students who had gathered 20 magic cards were secretly working hard. It was definitely a very glorious thing to be able to join the duel club in their first year. If they missed this opportunity, they would have to spend the rest of the semester cheering for the students who won the tickets from the audience. This was absolutely unacceptable for ambitious students. Therefore, he was determined to get this ticket. After lunch, Dake, Anna, and Luo Si returned to the tower of the aristocrat house. The three of them agreed on a time to go out together and returned to the dormitory. Dake opened the door and saw the magic elves busy with their own things. The horned hawk was chased to the balcony as usual, and it was happily fighting with the wooden dummies. The Dilu beast occupied the top of the cat tree and was struggling to read the children's book according to the dictionary. Among all the magic elves, the Dilu beast's learning speed was the fastest, and it was also the most serious. Every time Dake came back, he couldn't help but praise it a few times, and then it would be more serious. So far, the Dilu beast had gotten the most little red flowers besides the little devil. As for the other magic elves, the polymorph liked to mix with the trash slime. Kettle was studying the art of tea. Chocho Sea Lion was soaking in the air cushion pool all day, practicing blowing bubbles out of boredom. Dake sometimes hoped that it could learn bubbles by itself, but it was just a thought. Big Milk Can was taking care of the 3 catnip plants, just like the class monitor of a kindergarten class. Dake taught it how to take care of the insect tree, and it was full of hope that it could grow to the point where it could take care of the plants for it. There was also Ivan and Fairy Ivan. Ever since Fairy Ivan used its ribbon antennae to hang it up, Ivan and Fairy Ivan didn't get along. Now it was also far away. Ivan was gnawing hard at the textbook, trying to rely on the power of knowledge to complete a counterattack. Fairy Ivan was flipping through Dake's The Costume Changer, and it showed an unusual interest in all kinds of strange outfits. Dake didn't reject them from showing themselves, but the prerequisite was that their basic education could keep up. As long as they could do a good basic education, Dake would teach them according to their aptitude, and continue to teach them according to their preferences. For example, he could give Fairy Ivan a small skirt or something. Me! When it heard the door open, Fairy Ivan instantly pricked up its ears, put down the costume changer without any reluctance, and rushed to its master. Shameless! The Dilu beast complained in a low voice, and continued to read. It really liked The Journey of a Kitten in Dreams in its hands. After Dake caught Fairy Ivan, it barely avoided its tongue and said with a trace of affection, Okay, you don't have to be like this every time. But of course, this kind of half-soft and half-hard words couldn't make Fairy Ivan stop. He could only hug it and sit down on the bed, and use the eagle hand flexibly to make it relax in bliss. Then he clapped his hands, gathered the magic guide fairies and said, I'll have to trouble you again for the duel club's recruitment this afternoon. 2 in 1 4,000 words. Requesting monthly votes. Chapter 232. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Dueling Hall 1. The members of the dueling club had already set up the venue before noon. Even though the dueling club was still led by a student, the 3 instructors had the most authority. Professor Pawa Cheong-si was one of them. Professor Cheong-si was dressed casually today. She only wore a jacket and tied a bow above her abdomen. She was not afraid of the cold at all, revealing her rock-like abs. She stood in the crowd like a lighthouse, like a crane in a flock of chickens. Beside her was an old man. The old man had white hair and a beard, but his back was straight. He wore a thick cotton coat. His name was Hans Fox, and he was also a dueling professor. There were 2 instructors for today's dueling club recruitment. They were Pawa Cheong-si and Hans Fox. Remember the website, Vipkanshu. 6-inch will the little dimming you mentioned come this afternoon. Professor Fox rubbed the corner of her eyes. Perhaps it was because of her age, but she felt that her eyesight had been deteriorating recently. He should be coming. Professor Cheong-si crossed her arms in front of her chest and smirked. The competition between professors was very simple. Whoever taught the best students had the loudest voice. Professor Fox had always relied on his seniority to look down on new professors like her. Today, she finally had the chance to do the same to him. The competition between the two instructors left the dueling club's head speechless. No one liked to be watched by a professor when they were doing something. Although the dueling club's recruitment was not a small matter, it was not to the point where a professor needed to monitor it. In the past, the professor would only ask a few questions after the recruitment ended. What was going on today? Is it because the brave one is here? The head of the department felt a headache coming on. He was already in his 5th year and would graduate in a year. According to the rules, he needed to complete the handover this semester and give up his position as head of department. However, he had been ahead of the Shangmalian Academy and had successfully stepped down from his position. This would bring him great benefits when he was in his 6th year. The premise was that he had to step down smoothly. Let's hope no one causes any trouble this semester. The head of the duel club was called Joe William. He had red hair, was tall and sturdy, and came from a noble family in a manner. Although his father was a minor noble, his mother was only a maid in a manner, so he was born in an awkward position. The thing that saved his life was the Shangmalian Academy's invitation letter. Now that his mother's status had risen because of her son, she had successfully been promoted from a maid to a noble's wife. He had also finally received his father's approval. Once he successfully graduated and took up his position, he would slowly become a reputable archmage. Then, he would be able to repay his father and raise his father's status. As long as everything went smoothly, he felt that his efforts had not been in vain. Director, can you be a little more confident? If a person doesn't even dare to admit his own excellence, then what's the difference between living and cooking? The vice president of the duel club, Inia Knight, had a look of disappointment on her face as usual. Inia Knight, who came from a family of knights, was a student of the Knight Academy, just like Minister William. Inia was selected by William when she was in her 2nd year and was promoted to vice president when she was in her 3rd year. Now she was in her 4th year. When Minister William stepped down, she would become the new director of the duel club. Inia was different from the indecisive Joe William. She was decisive, confident, and tenacious. She had completely inherited her father's personality. Inia's hair was yellow and tied up in a ponytail. She had a heroic spirit between her eyebrows. Even standing beside the tall and sturdy William, it was hard to hide her tall figure. In short, she was a very attractive woman. William scratched the corner of his mouth and helplessly said, "How am I outstanding? Other than being a little more hardworking than others, my physique is a little better, and I can stay up late." Inia rolled her eyes and was too lazy to bother with him. "Open the door, it's time to let the newcomers in." At this moment, there were already many people waiting outside the first battle hall. Because it was a battle hall recruitment, there was no rule that no one could accompany or watch. So almost all the first-year students had come. On the contrary, this was the 3rd time the 2nd years were recruiting, so there were not as many people as the first years. Naturally, there were even fewer students from the higher years. Dake didn't squeeze into the crowd. Instead, he was a little further away, using his finger to poke the little Ibu on the card to pass the time. Ibu-chan shyly avoided his fingers, but in her heart, she was very happy. Anna beside Dake couldn't hold back her temper. She would look into the crowd from time to time. Luo-si held her hand and didn't let her squeeze into the crowd. The duel club didn't recruit first or last, so there was no point in fearlessly fighting. Another 2 minutes passed. The first battle hall's front door finally opened from the inside. The students who had been waiting for a long time immediately poured in. The crowd outside was decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. When there were almost no more people left, Dake and the other two entered unhurriedly. There wasn't anything in the hall that would make people's eyes light up. There were only a few ordinary banners hanging. There were a total of 3 counters not far from the door. Students needed to register at the counters and show their magic cards. Anyone who had 20 magic cards would be able to receive a number plate. Next, they just needed to hold the number plate and wait to go on stage. The duel club's referees would grade the students based on their performance in the duels. There would be 3 referees for each duel. Every student had 3 chances to go on stage. They could get a total of 9 points. After removing the highest and lowest points, and then taking the average, that would be the student's performance score. When the recruitment event came to an end, the duel club would post everyone's performance. Then it would take a cutoff. Those above the cutoff would pass. Those below the cutoff would have to work harder, because it was a more subjective review. So students who didn't pass could apply for a 4th duel by challenging the referees. As long as they won the 4th duel, they could enter the duel club unconditionally. Of course, most people wouldn't do that. Hear, hear. Anna became livelier as the duel club's atmosphere became more lively. She pulled Dake's hand and ran to one of the counters. There were a total of 3 counters, and there were more than 30 people in front of each counter. In total, there were about 100 people. Because the registration time was only half an hour after the doors opened, people usually wouldn't be late. Dake followed Anna to the end of the line and observed carefully. There were many familiar faces in the line. Other than the top 8 from the last class competition, there were many students whose names he could barely remember. Apart from them, most of them were second-year students. The second-year students had already gone through 2 rounds of recruitment. Those who stayed until now were probably not the top students, but the accumulation of time would make them more difficult to deal with than last semester. Of course, the most difficult ones were the upperclassmen mixed in the line. For various reasons, the upperclassmen couldn't enter the duel club when they were still in the lower grades. Even though they were reduced to competing with the lower grades, they still had the demeanor of upperclassmen. Just by standing there, they were like cranes in a flock of chickens. Dake's eyelids suddenly twitched. Hey, isn't that C. Keat? Yes, C. Keat from the second-year aristocratic house was also on the list for this round of recruitment. However, Dake's gaze only stayed on him for a few seconds before shifting to the upperclassmen from the 3rd and 4th years. In a duel with a scoring system, there was no need to worry about winning or losing. He really wanted to have a friendly duel with them. The line moved forward very quickly. When Dake came back to his senses, Anna had already received her number plate. She raised her number plate to show it off and walked to the side. Dake took a step forward, registered under the guidance of the staff, and took out his card set. There was a fundamental difference between a magic card that had been refined and an unrefined one, and it was extremely easy to identify. The staff only asked him to show the back of his card, and counted to 20 to pass. This is your number plate. I wish you luck. Thank you. Dake took the number plate and looked at it. It was indeed a lucky number. 666. 2:30. The flow of people suddenly surged. Dake's mind moved slightly, and he followed the flow of people forward. When the flow of people stopped, they had already arrived in front of a high platform. The boy on the high platform was wearing a proper school uniform, and his hair was meticulously combed back, but his vermilion hair still showed off his personality. However, he was actually a very introverted person. Good afternoon, I am Joe William, the current director of the duel club. William first introduced himself, and then he entered the routine segment of his speech. His language was very infectious, and it made people's blood boil just by listening to it. But after listening to it for a while, it was just that. It was nothing more than that, friendship first, competition second. Come on, this is a duel club. A duel club where the winner takes all, and the loser eats the dust. Perhaps even William himself didn't believe this when he said it. However, this kind of speech was still good for the moral education of the lower grade students. After he finished his speech, it was Deputy Minister Inia Knight's turn. Inia immediately announced the rules of the recruitment competition, but it was a typical hero is judged by victory and defeat, which completely contradicted William's words. The rookie duels will be held in 4 venues at the same time. Friends and family can watch, but please don't do anything that will affect the performance of the contestants. Finally, I wish you all a victory. Oh, it's finally over. Diana covered her head with her hands and gave a sudden jerk to make herself more alert. You can't take it anymore. Dake couldn't help but laugh. Let's look at the competition schedule first. While the director and deputy director of the duel club took turns to give their speeches, the order of the first round of duels had been arranged, and the competition schedule was posted on the bulletin board. When they arrived, the bulletin board was already surrounded by people. Diana suddenly complained. What do we do? Salad. Luo Si came out of nowhere and said with a smile. I've already looked at it for you. Diana is in number 123, right? Venue 1, the third round. Dake is also in venue 1, but it's the sixth round. Dake. Damn, we're going to have to wait. Luo Si. The smart ones have already taken their seats in venue 1, the dumb ones are just scratching their heads. Diana. Idiot. Omega. Outside the first venue, there was only one long bench. At this moment, there was a lonely small bag on it. This way of taking up seats was normal, but it was unavoidable for people to dislike it. Therefore, Luo Si quickly returned to the bench and pulled Dake and Diana over. As soon as Dake sat down, he saw Professor Cheong Si and Professor Fox sitting at the judges' table. He immediately realized that it wasn't a coincidence that he and Diana were placed in venue 1. Sure enough, not long after, White and Luo Boat appeared in his field of vision. Then Saraswati, surrounded by her friends, also arrived at venue 1. Then even AI Ma came over with 2 friends. Can't you at least cover it up? Dake smacked his lips, put the bag on his knees, and counted the cards. Sprite cards, Fantasy Beast. Ibu, Fantasy Beast. Ever-changing Monster, Trash Slime, Curse Cage. Little Demon Beast, Ball Sea Lion. Kettle Kettle, Hawkman Wrestling. Delu Beast, Milk Can, Fairy Ibu, Magic Cards, Happy Card, Pride Eye, Pride 2. Old, Pride 2. New, Greed 2. Bliss 3. Month, Bliss 3. Magic Bullet Curse. X2, Push Curse, Obstruction Curse. X2, Fade Curse, Flicker Curse. X2 Item Cards. Energy. Potion. X5, Silence Potion. Reveal Powder X2. There were a total of 25 types and 33 magic cards. According to the rules of the newcomers' competition, the number of magic cards in a set could not be less than 20, and could not be more than 40. Duelists would usually choose the middle number, which was 30 cards. In addition, one could not have more than 3 magic cards of the same name at the same time. In short, with 20 cards as the minimum, the only 10 magic sprite cards must all be used, and the rest can be adjusted as appropriate. This is the first time the competition is official. I'm getting more and more excited. On the judging panel in Arena 1, Professor Fox tried his best to open his eyes and stared down for a while. Then he pointed at someone and said hesitantly, "Is that Dake dimming?" Professor Cheong Si paused for a moment and then said helplessly, "Professor Fox, I know a very good spectacle maker." Professor Fox immediately responded, "Okay, that's the future hero." "No. What about the Valkyrie's son? He's sitting there." Professor Cheong Si pointed at someone who was sandwiched between 2 girls. Fox blinked and confirmed that he was not mistaken about the hair length of the 2 girls. He then said happily, "Oh, he's a little like that kid. 2 in 1 4,000 looking for votes." Chapter 233. As the recruitment competition was about to begin, more and more people entered Hall 1. They avoided the initial peak of the crowd and left the space for those who needed it. Then they slowly walked in. I've watched too many high-end games. It's also interesting to watch the newbies fight each other occasionally. I wonder how many first-year students will join the club this year. Last year was so bleak. It's obviously different this year. Look at the clubs over there. They're already trying to recruit people. They're really something. They always wait for people half a year in advance. This is called seizing the opportunity. Can they really wait until next school year to have more? True. Those who were watching couldn't win against those who were actually doing something. All the clubs were already waiting for the competition. Remember. https://vipcanshu. Vip in order to show the superiority of their clubs. Every club that intended to recruit new members would raise their signboards full of slogans high up, as if they were afraid that the first-year students with potential would not see them. However, among all the big signboards, the Veteran Literature Club only raised a small signboard, and it was raised upside down. It's just a formality. Don't mind it. There were only 2 members of the Literature Club who were in charge of recruiting new members. One was Winnie Scarty, who was once invited by the eldest princess to dance at the Halloween ball. The other was AI Ma's dance partner at the Halloween ball, a third-year senior, Helena Tracy. Winnie wore black-rimmed glasses, had shoulder-length black hair, small facial features, quiet and wise. She was a serious literary girl who never left her books. Helena, on the other hand, was more valiant and stubborn. She often argued with AI Ma about some literary issues. Of course, the more they argued, the better they got. The main target of the Literature Club this time was Sarah and AI Ma. One from the School of Magic and the other from the School of Knights. The 2 of them were in charge of one each. Helena was obviously very confident. Her tone seemed to be saying that as long as she asked, AI Ma would join the Literature Club even if it meant losing money. Winnie, on the other hand, was quite distressed. After all, she didn't know Sarah at all. However, she had to do the president's mission. The 2 of them arrived near Hall 1 and saw the brown-haired girl go up the contestant stage. Over there. Helena called out and quickened her pace. When she arrived at Arena 1, she suddenly realized that AI Ma's opponent was a familiar third-year student. Isn't that Angelia? Why would she appear at the Duel Club's recruitment competition? Helena's face was filled with astonishment, and she didn't feel very good. Winnie, who was right behind him, thought for a moment and said, "Let me think, she mentioned last semester that the books she wanted to read were getting more and more expensive." Helena slapped her thigh and grumbled, "Just tell me if you can't afford it. Why don't we just buy them when the club updates the library?" Winnie said, "She doesn't like sharing a book with others." Helena, "Women are so pretentious." Winnie was speechless. Helena, forget it. I'm quite curious about her strength. It's just that AI Ma might have a hard time." Winnie said, "Only through hardship can one rise to the top." The Shang-Malian school uniforms were basically the same in style. The only difference was the school emblem on the chest. In addition to the different school emblems, the bands below the school emblems were also differentiated according to each year. The first-year uniforms only had 1 star, the second-year uniforms had 2, and so on. The third-year uniforms naturally had 3 stars. So when Angelia appeared, everyone could tell that she was a third-year student at a glance. First year versus third year. Exclamations sounded one after another. More and more people started to gather around. The first-year knights couldn't help but sweat for AI Ma. AI Ma was their ace. If she lost in the first round, it wouldn't be something to laugh about. Many people were still waiting for AI Ma to appear in the newcomers competition so that they could go to the outdoor arena to cheer for her. If she unexpectedly lost, it would be awkward. She would probably be suppressed by the aristocrat house for the entire semester. So when AI Ma stepped onto the red team's platform, she suddenly heard the cheers from below. She was slightly stunned and then felt a little shy. Her initial fear of the third-year students suddenly disappeared. AI Ma, you have to do your best. AI Ma patted her cheeks and suddenly focused her eyes. No matter who the opponent was, she just had to give it her all. Hey, this child's mentality is really good. Professor Fox rubbed his eyes and was a little surprised. AI Ma Métis is also the disciple of the Sage of Secrets. Professor Cheong Si didn't hide his pride. Although AI Ma's mentality was adjusted quickly and was beyond his expectations, he obviously couldn't say it out loud. When school first started, AI Ma's mentality shouldn't be so stable. What changed her? Outside the arena, Deanna couldn't help but ask, "Can she win?" "I don't know." Dake shook his head and said, "It depends on her opponent. If it was a bad student like C. Keat, then AI Ma definitely had hope. But if it was a top student like Betty, then it would be difficult." He also didn't expect AI Ma to encounter a third-year student in the first round. This should have been a low-probability event. But the current situation also gave him a warning. Maybe his opponent would also be a senior student. If only that was the case. Looking forward to it. Dake slightly raised his head. The two sides on the platform were using the loudspeaker to communicate. AI Ma very politely said hello. Angelia only replied, "Hurry up." AI Ma was stunned. "Ah." Angelia seemed to realize that her words were inappropriate and added, "Let's talk next time." AI Ma. "Next time." Beep. The referee whistled. The communication between the two sides ended and the game entered the countdown. Draw card. Watching the competition from the sidelines was a completely different experience from being on the contestant stage. Dake was fully focused. The huge projection of the two card tables had already been fully displayed in front of the platform. Preparation stage. 30s. The above words were displayed directly above the card table. And at the top left, the current magic power of the magic ball was displayed. 2000. The magic ball's life enchantment had 5 levels, and the corresponding magic power of each level was divided into 1000, 2000, 4000, 8000, and 16,000. This game was using the rules of the newcomer competition, so the magic ball's life enchantment was level 2. Although the rules change is small, it has a huge impact on the game. I don't know if AI Ma can adapt. Dake's eyes glanced at the card slot at the bottom right of the card table. A whole stack of magic cards was placed in the card slot, and they had been automatically shuffled. Next, the duelists would have 30 seconds to draw cards and think about tactics. Watching from the perspective of the audience, AI Ma's card draw speed was faster than Angelia's, but Angelia was obviously more relaxed. 30 seconds of thinking time passed in the blink of an eye. A slight tick sound came from the card table, and the words above instantly became frowny face battle stage. 30s. The duel had entered the first round. Both sides began to summon their magic spirits without hesitation. AI Ma's normal summoning skills were already very proficient, and could be said to be second to none among the first-year students. But Angelia was obviously faster than her. In just 3 seconds, Angelia had summoned her first magic guide elf. Magic summoning. Accompanied by a slightly indifferent voice, a book emitting a faint white light flew out from her hand. It opened from the middle, and the pages on both sides were like wings, but like a goshawk, it swooped down on AI Ma's red magic ball. Its speed was so fast that it made people speechless. AI Ma's expression changed, and the summoning spell in her mouth changed. The length and width of the 30 by 20 space was nothing in front of real speed. When AI Ma summoned the gold beast, Angelia's bookworm had already fiercely pecked at the red magic ball. 20001900, but the magic ball's mana only decreased by 100 points. It's just a 1-star magic spirit with nothing but speed. The first-year students of the Night Academy breathed a sigh of relief. The speed and momentum of the bookworm almost made them think that AI Ma was going to be killed in one hit. Woo! Lucy, hold on to me a little. Susan leaned on Lucy's shoulder, feeling her legs and feet were weak. The spectators were already like this, let alone the players on the field. AI Ma couldn't help but feel nervous at this time, and the sound of her heartbeat directly hit her eardrum. After the bookworm pecked at the red magic ball, it quickly flew back to the blue summoning area. After that, the gold beast landed heavily on the ground, protecting the red magic ball. But before AI Ma could relax, Angelia's bookworm suddenly shook, and then its figure blurred, and when it became clear again, it had split into 2 books. On the blue player's platform, Angelia had already raised a magic spirit card in her hand high and began to chant the spell of sacrifice summoning. At this time suddenly someone noticed. The bookworm card shown in the projection wasn't a 1-star card, but a 2-star card. It's a 2-star magic spirit. Dake, who was outside the field, couldn't help but show a surprised expression. The surface of the magic card could reveal a lot of information. The card name, level, race, attribute, mana, attack and defense. Other than the skill information, the basic information was directly indicated. Angelia's bookworm had 1,000 points of mana, which was at the peak of 2-star level, and 100 points of attack and defense. Judging from its performance just now, its extremely fast speed was another hidden advantage of it. But only 100 points of attack and defense were weak, but it seemed to be enough to trigger a certain mechanism. Dark had a feeling that the bookworm's peck on the magic conducting ball had to have some kind of meaning. It was very likely that it was that peck that triggered the ability of splitting. And the bookworm that it split from might have the 3 measurements lower, but it was obviously a 2-star magic spirit. In just a few seconds, Angelia had already created 2 2-star beasts. With 2 2-star magic spirits, of course, she could use the sacrificial summoning spell to directly summon a 4-star magic spirit. Card name, bookworm. Type, spirit card. Level, race, fairy species. Attribute, fairy type. Mana, 1000. Attack, 100. Defense, 100. Killing skills, worm suck, infinite library. And Angelia was very proficient in using the sacrificial summoning spell. The summoning speed was even faster than AI Ma's usual summoning spell. Seeing that the sacrificial summoning circle had already appeared in the blue team's summoning area, even Minister William of the Duel Club was shocked. Why did a student with such ability only join the Duel Club in the 2nd semester of the 3rd year? Those credits that can be picked up everywhere, isn't it good? Sure enough, the thoughts of a genius are not something that an ordinary person like me can understand. Ineos stared at him again. She didn't expect a shark to appear in the recruitment competition. But this time she could only blame AI Ma's bad luck. Originally, although they had done some tricks according to the guidance professor's instructions, they had only transferred a few first-year students to Venue 1. The rest were still randomly matched. She could only hope that the pitiful first-year students would not be unable to recover after being beaten up by the upperclassmen. When Angelia summoned the 4-star magic spirit, AI Ma's usual summoning spell had just finished its cooldown. She only had a lone golden beast in her field. A golden beast with 1,000 mana, 1,300 attack, and 1,500 defense. It was also one of the top 3-star magic spirits. But facing a 4-star magic spirit that was a level higher, it was not a match at all. AI Ma had many methods to strengthen the golden beast, but because of the insufficient summoning speed, she could not use them. When she finally summoned the 2nd magic spirit, the golden beast had already been defeated by Angelia's 4-star magic spirit. Even the red magic ball had already fallen into the hands of the 4-star magic spirit. As a result, her 2nd magic spirit could only watch as the other party completely shattered the magic ball's life barrier. This duel, from the beginning to the end, did not even last a single round. In a short 30 seconds, everything was over. AI Ma was the face of the first-year Knight Academy, but in front of this 3rd-year senior, she could not resist at all. Her failure not only caused her own emotions to fall to the bottom of the valley, even the first years lost their initial excitement. Xing Malian had a strong competitive atmosphere. There was competition between schools, grades, and clubs. Sometimes the students would be hostile to each other, and sometimes they would unite against a common enemy. While the first years were silent, the 3 judges at the judging panel had already started to score. The score was based on a 10-point system. There were 2 signs in front of each judge, one red and one blue. In order to speed things up, the judges did not need to comment and directly gave the score. Professor Cheong sighed slightly and raised the 2 signs. Blue side Angelia, 10 points. Red side AI Ma, 5 points. Professor Fox glanced at her and raised his sign as well. Blue side 9 points. Red side 3 points. The other fifth-year judge was under a lot of pressure beside the two instructors, but he still braced himself and completed the task of giving the score. Blue side 10 points. Red side 6 points. 2 in 1/4/150. Looking for monthly votes, believe it and you will get it. Chapter 234. 5 points, 3 points and 6 points. Dake thought for a bit and understood the scoring criteria of the judges. Professor Cheong-si's scoring was a bit subjective. Professor Fox was more strict, and the only student judge gave the most standard scores. AI Ma did lose the duel, but that was because her opponent was too strong. She couldn't be blamed for this. In these short 30 seconds, she had already done everything she could. The calmness before the start of the match, the stable mentality when facing the third-year students, and the fast summoning speed compared to the first-year students were all bonus points. Therefore, the student judge gave her a passing score of 6 points. Generally speaking, if the average score was above 6 points, then passing the review was a sure thing. Professor Cheong-si's 5 points were barely enough, but Professor Fox's 3 points were not so good. If AI Ma wanted to pass, she had to perform well in the next 2 duels. URL https://vipcanshu VIP on the red team's platform. AI Ma silently recorded the score she got, but she was slightly relieved. When she confirmed her defeat, she thought of the worst possibility, such as 0 points. Fortunately, it was not. I couldn't even last 1 round. This is really embarrassing. Patting her red cheeks, the little girl with brown curly hair held back the bitterness in her heart. Failure was a common thing, she had experienced it several times. Every time she failed, she would become stronger. She would also gain experience from failure to make herself more and more perfect. This time, of course, was the same. She closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. It was over in a flash. The next round, you have to do your best. Unknowingly, AI Ma had already walked off the platform. Susan and Lucy, one on the left and one on the right, immediately held her hand. Susan shouted on the spot, "What's wrong with this stupid competition? Why did they send a third year to bully people? AI Ma, don't worry, just fight back in the next round." Lucy also agreed. "Yes, our AI Ma can definitely do it." The corners of AI Ma's eyes reddened. She held it in and said, "What are you worried about? Do I look like such a fragile person?" Susan quickly said, "Of course not, AI Ma is very strong." Lucy said, "Strong as a balloon, hard as a balloon." AI Ma, "Is that how you talk about people?" Lucy said, "Haha, let's go. Let's go to the side and talk. It won't affect the next match." AI Ma, "Okay." As she walked out, she carefully glanced at the bench on the other side. Then, she immediately turned her head and walked away quickly. However, before he could take a few steps, 2 people appeared in front of him. Little AI Ma. Helena waved at AI Ma. AI Ma was stunned for a moment. Then she said something to her 2 friends and walked toward Helena. As soon as she got closer, she noticed Winnie beside Helena. This senior, who had danced with the first princess at the Halloween ball, had left a deep impression on her. But before she could ask, Helena put an arm around her shoulder, waved her fist and said casually, "Don't be sad. When I go back, I'll help you break Angelia's little head." Angelia. Aima came back to her senses. "Is that the senior just now?" Helena nodded with a smile. Angelia Hudson, a third-year student of the House of Fools and a member of our literature club. Aima frowned slightly. "She's from the House of Fools," Helena said, reserved and low-key. "That's how the House of Fools is." Then she introduced Winnie to Aima. "This is also a third-year senior, but she's from the School of Magic. Her name is Winnie Scarty." Aima nodded. "Yes, I know. Nice to meet you, senior." Winnie reached out and shook hands with her. Then Helena said, "We've seen your competition just now, and your basic skills are not bad. If your performance in the next 2 competitions is passable, we can give you a place in the literature club." Literature club. AI Ma was surprised. "Don't you have to wait until you're a second-year student to join the other clubs?" Helena smiled brightly. "It's called a pre-order ticket. The first year is the time to lay the foundation. Only with a good foundation can you take off. That's why the academy has this rule. After you're a second-year student, you'll understand how important a good team is. And our literature club is definitely second to none in the whole castle. You have to know that we only have 4 places for new members each year." AI Ma thought for a moment and asked, 4 branches, 1 for each?" Helena: "Most of them." AI Ma immediately understood. "Understood. Then I'll consider it when I'm a second-year student." Helena. Winnie saw her deflated and couldn't help but chuckle. "Actually, we're here to offer you an olive branch. It was Helena who recommended you. No matter how you perform, this place will be reserved for you. Course, the premise is that you're willing. Helena is right about one thing. A good team is very important, and our literature club will never lose face." Helena said helplessly, "Anyway, I've passed the message. You don't have to be distracted. You can give me an answer later." Ima nodded. Of course, she would consider it carefully. Before she really understood the literature club, she wouldn't make a promise casually. But now that she thought about it, she suddenly understood what Angelia meant by, "We'll talk next time." See. This made her relax a lot about the failure just now. At the same time, she was really interested in the literature club. She seems to be in a good condition. Dake glanced at the literature club sign that Helena was holding casually and turned his head back. Deanna used 2 fingers to pull down the corner of her eyes and muttered, "If it were me, I would definitely be like this by now." Luo Si exposed her mercilessly. "Who are you kidding? Just put a piece of milk candy in your mouth and you'll forget everything." Deanna smiled and said, "It's because the milk candy is so delicious." The 3 of them continued to look at the arena. The curtains of the second match soon began. It was a match between 2 second-year students. The first-year students also saw the ordinary standard of the second-year students at this time. Their usual summoning speed was about 5 to 10 seconds. The sacrificial summoning speed was more than 10 seconds. In terms of summoning speed, they were even slightly inferior to Dake. But the foundation of an extra year of learning was shown in the magic cards. Their magic cards were obviously more varied. Both sides had their own characteristics, and there was at least 1 second-tier magic elven card. Why was it at least 1 card? This was because during the duel, they had only summoned one of them. Dake was more inclined to think that they had multiple second-tier magic elven cards, but the winner was decided before they could summon their elven cards. Although both of them had used second-tier magic elven cards, the scores of the 2 second-year students were not high. Professor Cheong Si and that senior only gave them a passing score. Professor Fox's score was even lower. It's probably because their summoning speed did not reach the standard of the second-year assessment. Plus, their other performances were not outstanding. Dake thought for a while and guessed the reason. Diana, who was beside him, looked at the old Professor Fox and whispered, "That white-haired grandpa always feels very strict. Will he not like bears?" Dake thought for a long time before he figured out what she was thinking. He could not help but say, "Don't worry, he won't give you a low score just because he doesn't like bears." Deanna jumped to the ground and waved her hand. "It's my turn," Luo Si said. "I hope it's not a third-year student." Deanna said, "It's the same, the score doesn't depend on the outcome." She ran to the red side's platform, full of confidence. After the interval between the duels, the first-year spectators had finally calmed down. The Aristocrats Academy students were refreshed, ready to shout a few words when Deanna gained the upper hand. But as Deanna walked onto the stage, her opponent also walked out from the crowd. It was a second-year student. First year versus second year. This was not rare in the recruitment competition. Because the gap between the two sides was not big, the two sides could usually fight back and forth. Of course, the second-year students had a higher winning rate. The first-year students of the Aristocrats' Academy had learned their lesson from the Knights' Academy, so they restrained themselves when cheering. On the other hand, the second-year student's friend was full of energy, looking at the first-year students with disdain. Yes, they were obviously from the Knights' Academy. The two academies had been at odds for a long time. Even if they had a good personal relationship, once it involved the competition between the two academies, they would instantly fall out. All friendship would have to wait until the winner was decided. However, the situation was stronger than the person. The first-year students of the Aristocrats' Academy gritted their teeth, but they had no confidence in winning, so they could only wait. Both sides, please enter the stage as soon as possible. Under the urging of the referee, the second-year student of the Knights' Academy finally stepped onto the blue side's platform. He activated the card table and said through the loudspeaker, "You're so small, how can you participate in the competition?" Deanna was originally happy, but when she was suddenly asked, she was stunned and confused. What does being small have to do with participating in the competition? The second-year student scratched his head and asked, "I can't even reach the table, how can I play cards?" Deanna put her hand on the card table and asked doubtfully, "Can I reach it?" Dake, who was outside the arena, almost lost his composure. Luo-si asked curiously, "Is this the kind of trash talk that Professor Cheong-si used to talk about?" Dake shrugged. "Maybe," Luo-si suddenly said. "The professor said that during the preparation stage, you can use your words to influence the opponent's mentality. This is also a kind of tactic. But this is the first time I've seen real trash talk. Isn't he afraid of being disliked?" Dake, "Maybe he's already disliked enough." Luo-si, "That's true." The second-year student was indeed restrained. Under the gaze of the two professors, he didn't dare to say too much. But this level of trash talk was nothing to Deanna. She didn't take it seriously at all. After putting the cards into the card slot, Deanna took the initiative to ask, "By the way, what's your name?" The second-year student said, "Marjorie Gresham. What about you?" Deanna shook her head. "I'm not telling you." Marjorie was stunned. "Then why are you asking for my name?" Deanna shook her head and said, Deanna, don't kill nameless people." Marjorie held it in for a long time and suddenly realized that this guy's name was Deanna. Beep. The referee's whistle interrupted the conversation between the two of them. The competition entered the second half of the preparation stage. Preparation stage. 30s. Deanna energetically took out 5 cards from the shuffled deck. Then, her eyes lit up as she found the Spirit Bear in her hand. As a light-type undying species, the Spirit Bear was a special magic elven card with attack power that exceeded the standard 3-star standard. This Spirit Bear could be said to be Deanna's trump card. She didn't hesitate and took out a corner of this Spirit Bear. Tick! The 30-second countdown ended quickly. The duel entered the battle stage. Deanna immediately began to summon the Spirit Bear. Her usual summoning skill was only within 10 seconds, so it couldn't be compared to Dake and AI Ma. However, the second-year student opposite her, Marjorie, wasn't a particularly outstanding student, so the gap between the two of them wasn't too big. As expected, Marjorie also used a full 8 seconds to summon the first magic elven card. The usual summoning skills of both sides were completed almost at the same time. "Come out, long-necked camel. It's decided to be you, Spirit Bear." The light from the magic card fell on the summoning area on both sides. 2 large beasts appeared in the light. Deanna's Spirit Bear was 3 meters tall even when it was on all fours. Its body was emitting a blazing white light, and its eyes were showing the depth of the vicissitudes of life and the kindness of old age. On the other hand, Marjorie's long-necked camel was like a camel without a hump, but with a long neck and a short elephant trunk. This kind of ancient animal only existed in ancient documents and fossils before the birth of magic technology. However, it was now known to the world as a magic elven card. Among the 3-star magic elves, the long-necked camel was a powerful creature that wasn't inferior to the troll in terms of size and measurements. If one had to say something, it was just that its agility wasn't as good as that of the troll. Marjorie was very confident in his long-necked camel. With 1,500 points of attack and 1,400 points of defense, it was difficult for it to be a match among the 3-star magic elves. Heavy armor charge. Crush it. Under Marjorie's command, the long-necked camel suddenly accelerated and charged towards the spirit bear like a heavily armored chariot. Its huge body caused the ground to shake with every step it took. Roar. Facing the approaching giant beast, the kindness in the spirit bear's eyes disappeared, and it charged towards it without fear. Boom! There was a loud noise. Marjorie's face suddenly changed. 2 in 1 4,000 words. Vote monthly and you'll get it. Chapter 235. It was a very simple math problem. 17001500 The spirit bear with an attack power of 1700 was stronger than the long-necked camel with an attack power of 1500. Due to the angle, it was not easy for the duelists to see the value of the opponent's magic card during the duel. In addition, they needed to give orders to the magic elf within the short cooldown period of the summoning, so they could not take care of many things. Marjorie was very confident in the long-necked camel's strength. He never thought that it would lose in a battle of strength. However, reality gave him a heavy blow. The long-necked camel suffered from the impact of both sides during the fierce collision. Its entire body tilted and fell like a mountain rock. On the other hand, although the spirit bear suffered the same impact, its body was only deformed. However, it was a condensation of light, so it almost immediately returned to its original form. The spirit bear with a defense power of 0 was only immune to physical attacks. It could only be said that the compatibility between the two sides was too poor. Remember the website, Vipkanshu. 6 After the spirit bear returned to its original form, it suddenly pressed down on the long-necked camel's neck, opened its bloody mouth and bit down. Hey Sai! The long-necked camel's magic power decreased along with its scream. Marjorie panicked for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he suddenly noticed that the cooldown period of the normal summoning spell had passed. He quickly took out a magic card to summon. On the other hand, Deanna on the opposite side had already started to summon the next magic card. Before Marjorie, Deanna completed the second normal summoning spell. A brand new magic guide sprite that even Dark had never seen before appeared in the red team's summoning area. It was still a bear. The red bear with its fur fluttering like flames ran out of the light and rushed towards the long-necked camel that was being pressed on the ground by the spirit bear without hesitation. Card name, Flame Bear. Type, Elf card. Level, Race, Bird/Beast. Attribute, Fire/Combat. Magic power, 800. Attack, 1000. Defense, 700. Ultimate skill, Flame Fist. The flame bear stood up as it ran. Its running posture became smoother and smoother, making it look more like a werbear. Just like many first-year students, Deanna also put in a lot of effort in order to gather 20 magic cards. This blazing bear was another product of the sway, base, refinement. The 2-star flame bear was not considered strong, but its ultimate skill burn characteristic allowed it to inflict continuous damage to its opponent. Moreover, as a member of the Bear Pack deck, he could also add Bear Fetters to the Bear of Earth. But just as it reached the long-necked camel, Marjorie finally completed the normal summon. He abruptly raised his magic card and roared, "Wooden prison!" instantly. With the long-necked camel as the center, sharp logs pierced through the ground, instantly forming a circular wooden prison that was 5 meters tall. It's locked. That wooden prison spell card wasn't a spell from the teaching materials. In order to make that wooden prison card, he had paid a huge price. The entire wooden prison could last for a full 3 minutes, which was 6 rounds. A magic guide elf with an attack power of less than 1500 would not be able to shatter it in a short time. Even if it exceeded 1500, it would still take a lot of effort. With this period of time as a buffer, he could do a lot of things. First, drag it out until the cooldown of the summoning is over and the second round begins. Then, use Flame Fist on it. Deanna's voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. He narrowed his eyes and saw that the red-furred bear was actually in an irregular stance. Like a martial artist, it held its left hand to the side of its abdomen and pulled its right hand back. It suddenly punched out. Boom! Flames burned fiercely on his fist. The indestructible round wood was smashed into pieces by this flame fist. The surrounding wood was quickly devoured by the flames, burning a huge hole in it. Almost at the same time, the hand of the long-necked hunchback spirit bear turned into starlight and flew back into Marjorie's magic card. Marjorie saw that the flame bear was the first one to get out of the hole in the wooden prison. Then, under Deanna's command, it directly attacked the blue magic ball. Marjorie's face turned extremely ugly. Wooden prison's biggest weakness was its fire. He didn't expect his opponent to be so lucky that the second summoned magic elf was a fire elemental one. Dida! The battle entered the second round. Marjorie's finger landed on the top of the card deck. However, he didn't draw these 2 new magic cards. That moment, seeing that the flame bear had gotten out of the wooden cage and was already rushing towards the magic ball, Marjorie didn't have time to think about whether the 2000 life enchantment barrier could withstand the attack of a mere flame bear. Almost subconsciously, he let go of the magic card in his hand and suddenly pointed his finger out. Up! His violent roar resounded throughout the arena. Under his full concentration, the blue magic ball in the center of the summoning area suddenly jumped up like a rubber ball. Bang! The flame bear's punch hit the air. Its intelligence level of only 2.5 made it stunned on the spot. However, as the duelist, Deanna blinked her eyes and clearly saw that the blue magic ball was wrapped in a layer of magic. There was a line of magic that connected from the back of the magic ball to Marjorie's finger. Although the line of magic was not invisible, Marjorie was indeed using magic to control the magic ball from a distance. This kind of advanced technique was not available to first-year students. It was a topic that would only be taught to second-year students. Moreover, it was difficult for second-year students to master it. Cheating. Deanna's mouth was slightly open. It was only now that she realized that the magic ball could be moved in the duel. The duelist was multitasking, controlling the magic ball to dodge while using the magic card to duel. This was a normal operation. However, the magic ball would absorb magic, so it would become very heavy in the perception of magic. If one wanted to move it, they would need to spend a lot of magic and energy. The magic power of a normal magister would not be able to support it for too long. Moreover, the special nature of the magic ball would cause the effect of magic manipulation to be limited to a certain range. It would limit the maximum amount of magic power that could be used on the magic ball. Therefore, even if there was a difference in the quality of magic power between the 2 duelists, the power that was used on the magic ball would be similar. In this way, as long as both parties used the same amount of energy, they would be able to control the magic ball on one point like a tug-of-war, forming a popular tug-of-war. However, if you only focused on controlling the opponent's magic ball, then the opponent would think of ways to sneak attack your magic ball. This was also a tactical choice. After all, it was already very difficult to multitask. If you could multitask 3 times, then you could only say that you were really awesome. However, Marjorie was obviously just a beginner. Just controlling the magic ball already required him to give it his all. While controlling the magic ball, he did not have the energy to use the magic card at all. Therefore, when Deanna ordered the spirit bear to attack the magic ball in the air, he could not continue to control the magic ball to dodge. On the other hand, Deanna had already drawn 2 new magic cards and started the 3rd normal summoning. Among the 2 new magic cards that she had drawn, one of them was the Strength of the Bear. It could give an additional attack power of star level x 300 to a bear-type magic spirit. However, facing the current situation, she had no choice but to choose another magic card. In the rapid chanting of the spell, her lips were trembling rapidly. Magic summoning. From the magic card, a white light suddenly bloomed. A white owl condensed and formed in the light. Charge. The owl's eyes suddenly narrowed. In the remaining light, it turned into an arrow and shot towards the blue magic ball. This 2-star white card's 3 measurements were impressive, but the important thing was that it could fly. The owl that suddenly joined the battle made Marjorie, who was already having a hard time, even more difficult. He could no longer care about the magic card in his hand. He was only trying his best to move the magic ball to dodge. This magic duel suddenly turned into a chase show in the air. Due to the limited area of the arena and the owl's intelligence, it could only chase in a straight line. It could not increase its speed and was dodged by Marjorie's magic ball again and again. Deanna glanced at the cards in her hand. She felt that all the magic cards would not be of any help in this situation. She simply threw herself into commanding the owl. The second round of the battle was forcefully dragged to the end. The third round. Since Marjorie didn't manage to draw 2 magic cards in the previous round, it wouldn't extend to this round. He could only draw 2 magic cards in this round, and he still didn't have the time to draw cards. However, Deanna drew 2 new magic cards the moment the round began. After that, she summoned a second bird-type magic guiding spirit. 2 2-star magic guide fairies without any skills flew in the air, crazily surrounding the blue magic guide ball. However, Marjorie's sudden burst of power and dribbled the ball past the bird. He actually managed to persevere. After several failed attempts, Deanna was so angry that she puffed up her cheeks. Until the 4th round, she suddenly used a push incantation on the blue magic ball. At that moment, the magic ball broke free from Marjorie's control and was forcefully pushed under the owl. Coo! The owl let out a joyful cry and hurriedly used its claws to hold it down. On the other side, Marjorie's face was pale. He finally stopped the magic manipulation and drew the 2 magic cards from the top of the deck. One of the magic cards reignited his hope. 8 seconds of summoning time was actually very short if one did not compare it to the summoning time. Although the blue magic ball had fallen, the 2,000 points of the barrier of life would not be broken so easily. Marjorie yelled. He actually summoned a 3-star archer. Card name, Grassland Archer. Type, Elf card. Level, ****. Race, human. Attribute, combat. Magic power, 900. Attack, 1200. Defense, 400. Ultimate skill, 3 simultaneous arrows. The Grassland Archer, who was wearing a green outfit and had paint on his face, drew his bow and shot the bird the moment he appeared. 3 arrows were shot at the same time. Poof! 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 One of the arrows flew straight into the sky. The other 2 arrows actually shot through Deanna's 2 flying magic elves at the same time. In the midst of 2 hurried screams, the 2 magic elves fell one after another. Marjorie immediately diverted his attention to control the magic ball again. At the same time, the Grassland Archer's neck was bitten off by the spirit bear. No blood flowed out, but the Grassland Archer turned into light after his magic power was exhausted. The situation in the field returned to the situation at the beginning of the second round. The only difference was that Marjorie's magic power transmission had already shown signs of instability. He was only in his 2nd year, and his magic power had not yet grown to the peak of adulthood. More than a minute of high-intensity long-distance control had already exhausted his strength. Once the excitement subsided, when he controlled the magic ball again, it seemed to be crooked. In addition to the quality of the magic card being surpassed, the main reason for this outcome was his psychological quality. The enchantment of life with 2,000 points of magic power could totally withstand a blow from the flame bear. As long as he could stay calm, he still had a chance. There was only one reason why he did not pass the assessment of the Duel Club last semester. Marjorie was unable to control the magic ball to continue flying to a high place where he could not reach it. Following Deanna's command, the spirit bear stood up like a human, suddenly leaped up, and slammed into the ground again. Boom! Everything was quiet. Beep. The battle is over. Winner, Deanna Gretbel. After the referee announced the result, the first-year students of the Aristocrats Academy outside the field paused for a while before they suddenly remembered to cheer. Deanna, who was on the red team's platform, also smacked her lips. She only felt that her mouth was bland and could not taste anything. I won just like that. She tiptoed to look at Marjorie, who was opposite her, and found that he was squatting down. She did not know what he was doing. This battle was so boring. She did not enjoy herself at all. But the judges did not care whether she enjoyed herself or not. The score was out very quickly. Professor Cheong-si was finally able to hold his head high. His aura when he raised his sign was very different. Red team Deanna 8 points. Blue team Marjorie 5 points. Professor Fox was so angry that his beard trembled. The second year was his teaching scope. Red team 9 points. Blue team 2 points. The last fifth-year student looked at Professor Fox's emotional way of giving the score and braced himself to give Marjorie a point. Red team 8 points. Blue team 6 points. In this duel, Deanna's performance could only be said to be average. 8 points was a very appropriate score. And Marjorie obviously failed. But the ability to control the magic ball from a distance was a bonus. 5 points would be a more standard score. If he could not reflect and improve in the next 2 matches, it was very likely that he would be eliminated again. Duelists do not give up until the very end. It was a kind of romance to fight back at the end of a candle in the wind. A strong and stable psychological quality was the foundation of everything. Dake, who was outside the field, turned the magic ring on his finger. He was gradually unable to hold back. 2 in 1 4,000. Monthly vote. As long as you believe in it. Chapter 236. Deanna, who had returned to the bench, was quite happy. After all, she had won. Therefore, she happily accepted the congratulations of her classmates from the Aristocratic Academy, and rewarded herself with a milk candy. The other clubs were also eager to join. Unlike Ai Ma, who had already been booked by the established literature club, Deanna was a hot steamed bun that no one had their eyes on. The existence of the spirit bear alone was enough to make people have the urge to recruit her into their club. Gretbel, is she the heir of the bear of the kingdom? A few people suddenly noticed Deanna's surname and couldn't help but feel surprised. The Great Bear family's bloodline was simply too overbearing. Everyone in the family was burly and stocky. Diana was truly an oddity among oddities. No matter how one looked at her, it was impossible to associate her with that family. It can't be true, right? Which one of you is from the Aristocratic Academy? Does anyone know more about it? No, although we are from the Aristocratic Academy, who would ask about the information of a first-year girl? Aren't you afraid of being called a fool? Remember it in 1 second. https://vipkanchu. Vip. In order to improve the team composition, there were many clubs in the academy that were not divided into departments. Although the members of each department did not like each other, they were not ignorant children. When it was time to work together, they would work together. Of course, there were even more clubs that were divided into departments. The Aristocratic History Research Club was one of them. Because the names of the clubs such as Aristocratic Society, Royal Court Society, Pure Blood Society were not approved, a small group of people from the Aristocratic Academy set up the Aristocratic History Research Club. On the surface, it was to study the history of the aristocrats, but in fact it was a small circle of pure-blood aristocrats. However, because the aristocrats' educational resources and bloodline talent were generally good, the Aristocratic History Research Club had always been strong. Of course, the Aristocratic History Research Club only recruited pure-blood aristocrats, and they also had to have a certain degree of family background. If the status of the family declined, they would be kicked out of the club. It was very cruel. And their absolute goal in this year's competition was naturally only one person, the son of the Duke, Dake Dimming. But at this time, the Aristocratic History Research Club's senior, Owen, who was in charge of recruiting new members, was secretly watching. According to the rules, they had to wait for the newcomer to display strength that matched their expectations in the recruitment competition before they could make a move. On the surface, the Aristocratic History Research Society had to maintain the image of not just looking at status, so they hadn't contacted Dake yet. However, Dake had yet to make an appearance. Deanna, who was beside him, had also shown great accomplishments. Her identity and background were also there. She completely met the recruitment requirements of the Aristocratic History Research Society. Should we contact them now, or should we wait until Dimming makes its appearance? Owen looked around and felt that it was not a big problem. The son of the Duchess could be said to be the representative of the pure-blood aristocrats. Now that he had joined the Aristocratic History Research Society, he could directly jump to the top status with his identity. There was no reason to refuse the recruitment. Kingdom Bear's little girl seemed to be following that person's lead, so they would most likely go together. It was just that the girl with light blonde hair on the other side didn't quite meet the requirements. But for the sake of the Duke's son, what's the big deal about breaking the rules? Let's do it together. Owen's calculations were very good. Unfortunately, if he didn't go, there would be others. With this slight delay, several societies approached Deanna. Among them, the Sports Society was the most enthusiastic. The Sports Society was considered a large society that had the support of the school. Although Deanna was small, her endurance and strength were outstanding. A bunch of musclemen also fantasized about recruiting a little princess into the society. Unfortunately, the reality was too cruel. Deanna shook her head at them. No, no, no. Not a single one. There was no room for discussion. She rejected all of them. Therefore, the societies came with expectations and left with disappointment. Dake's surroundings became quiet in the blink of an eye. Deanna swayed her legs and moved closer to Dake. Of course, she couldn't join other societies. Ever since Dake revealed in a chat that he wanted to restart the Magical Animal Society in his second year, Deanna had been thinking about it. It was a society that could openly raise bears in the school. Even if it wasn't for Dake, the Magical Animal Society was the most attractive society to her. As for the other random societies, they didn't have any attraction to her. If there was a candy society, a dessert society would be good too. A cake society would be good too. Slurp. The following 4th and 5th matches were also fights between the second years. The first-year students chatted and laughed, having a good time watching this. When the 2 seniors in the 5th match left the stage, it was finally the 6th match. Dake put away his card bag and looked up slightly. It's finally my turn. The contagion of the duel made him a little excited. Watching from the sidelines wasn't as refreshing as going up in person. Luosi waved her small fist. Good luck. Deanna had a serious face. Warrior number 1, come out and finish this quickly. However, she couldn't help but laugh. Dake shook his head helplessly. His excitement was all gone. I wonder who my opponent will be in the first round. He turned his head slightly, trying to find a senior who wanted to go up. He hoped it wasn't someone like Senior Marjorie. If it was someone like Senior Angelia, it would be great. In the 2 intra-class matches since he entered the school, he had always had the upper hand with his summoning speed. He wanted to experience the feeling of having a slower summoning speed. After all, it was impossible to always have a smooth sailing in life. One had to have the ability to make a comeback in the face of adversity. Of course, failure was also an experience. However, after looking for a while, he still couldn't find anyone. Forget it, they'll come eventually. Dake gave up looking and got up to walk to the red team's stage. Is it finally time to go up? Professor Fox squinted his eyes at Dake. He wanted to see with his own eyes what level this youth who had been blown up into a hot air balloon by Professor Cheong-si had reached. Professor Cheong-si glanced at the schedule and looked up. His opponent is number 39, but number 39 doesn't seem to be nearby. After a while, the referee's voice spread through the stadium through the loudspeaker. Number 39, please report to venue 1 as soon as possible. Dake was already on the stage. He leaned on the railing and looked down. He saw his classmate, Doran, yelling and shouting as he dueled with someone. His blood was boiling. Coming. A boy wearing a cotton cap and a thick jacket over his school uniform ran over in a hurry. He seemed to be afraid of the cold. Even in the relatively warm room. He wore a scarf and gloves. The referee looked at him unhappily. He bowed and explained, "Sorry, I went to the bathroom. I couldn't help but eat something cold at noon. I can't stand the temptation of ice, but every time I eat it, my stomach will protest." Okay. The referee waved his hand disdainfully. "Go, your opponent is waiting impatiently." "Okay." The boy in the cotton cap immediately ran to the stage. After he got on the stage, he activated the card table and said enthusiastically, "Hello, I'm John Smith from the 2nd grade House of Fools." Dake's expression relaxed. "First grade, Dake Dimming, House of Aristocrats." "Hello, senior," John said casually. "So you're a 1st grade junior. No wonder I haven't seen you before." "No, I think I've seen you before." "Oh right, at the assembly." "Few times." "Oh right, you also got an extra chance to make a wish in the Holy Grail. Did you succeed in making your wish?" "You must have. Didn't he get a great reward?" "I'm so envious." John Smith's chatterbox was completely opened. The words that came out of his mouth were like a flood of mud, flowing endlessly. Even Dark was stunned when he heard that. Why didn't this senior look like he was from the House of Fools? What happened to being low-key, reserved, and taciturn? "You're the wrong type." Beep. It seemed that the referee was tired of his incessant chatter and used a whistle to stop his speech. The duel entered the preparation stage. Dake put the cards into the card slot, activated the card table, and shuffled the cards automatically. Suddenly, John opened his mouth and said, "I missed the 2 recruitment events last year because of a stomachache." Dake said, John continued, "When I had a stomachache just now, I thought I was going to miss it again. Fortunately, it's okay." Dake was slightly startled. Then he understood what John meant. He couldn't help but smile. Beep. The moment the shuffling was over, the referee blew the whistle again. The duel entered the 30-second countdown stage. Dake instantly focused his mind, and the magic power in his body flowed. Then, he quickly and accurately drew all 5 of the starting cards from the top of the deck. It had been a long time since the last match. Dake was a little happy. He was finally standing on the duel stage again. Hawkman Wrestling. Greed 2. Curse Cage. Little Devil Beast. Milk Can. Flash Spell. Not bad. Dake quickly glanced at the 5 magic cards in his hand. The deck system hadn't taken shape yet, but this hand of cards was quite good. The 3-star Hawkman Wrestling was enough to start. The 4-star Milk Can's offerings were also enough. If necessary, he could summon the Milk Can within 25 seconds. With the Milk Can, it was equivalent to having an impenetrable wall. It could leave enough room for subsequent changes. Duel stage. 30s. Tick. The slight sound when the turn changed was instantly refreshing. Dake pinched the Hawkman Wrestling with 2 fingers and quickly drew it out. Respond to my summon, Hawkman Wrestling. It only took a little more than 3 seconds to summon. The Hawkman Wrestling suddenly rushed out of the light that bloomed on the card surface. When a duelist summoned a magic fairy, they would usually summon it to the ground of the summoning area. But when summoning a flying magic fairy, they would directly summon it to the sky of the summoning area. The Hawkman Wrestling, which was appearing in public for the first time, was extremely excited. Its fighting spirit was even stronger than its master's. It was a natural wrestler, a warrior who pursued victory. Card name, Hawkman Wrestling. Type, Fairy card. Level, *****. Race, bird/beast. Attribute, fighting/flying. Magic power, 1100. Attack, 1500. Defense, 1200. Ultimate skill, Feather Dance. Just a little more than a second slower than Dake, John also raised the magic card in his hand high. His face was full of confidence. A normal summoning time of 5 seconds was considered excellent even among the second-year students. Not to mention that this semester had just begun, and he still had a lot of room for improvement. With the completion of the normal summoning spell, countless ice flowers were instantly spat out from the card surface. Those ice flowers reflected the color of glass under the illumination of the room, beautiful and transparent. Ice Flower Wild Dance. It was accompanied by a loud shout. The ice flowers suddenly spun up. The audience outside the field was already shocked at this time. When John raised his hand, he actually broke the rules and didn't summon a magic fairy. Instead, he activated a magic spell card. This was a magic spell card that could be activated continuously. Under the guidance of John's magic power, the ice flowers rode the ice wind and rushed toward the Hawkman Wrestling, flying in the air in an instant. The ice element restrained the flying element. Once hit, the Hawkman Wrestling would definitely not have a good time. But its eyes flashed, and in the face of the sudden crisis, it faced it head-on without any fear. Acha! The moment before colliding with the ice flowers, the Hawkman Wrestling suddenly flapped its wings and spun. Countless feathers scattered from its wings spun up and wrapped around it. Swoosh! In an instant, the outer feathers were frozen into ice crystals by the Ice Flower Wild Dance. The reverse wind twisted the frozen feathers into pieces. The ice crystals suddenly exploded. Countless sparkling and translucent fragments suddenly fell from the sky. The Hawkman, who seemed to be wearing a wrestling mask, wrapped its whole body with cloak-like wings, rushed out of the countless ice crystal fragments like a rotating bullet. Gorgeous and handsome. Even Dake didn't expect it to be able to use the feather dance to interfere with the enemy so perfectly. The Hawkman Wrestling, who broke the ice element spell, swooped down from the sky like a goshawk hunting a rabbit. Accompanied by the whistling wind, it fiercely pecked the blue magic ball. Crack! Fine cracks bloomed on the life enchantment of the magic ball. The value representing its magic power dropped from 2,000 points to 521 points in an instant. At the same time, the front of the magic conducting ball lit up, and a giant monster condensed from ice elements flew out from the light. Its millstone-sized fist hammered the Hawkman's chest, and hammered him into the air. A piece of ice crystals appeared on the Hawkman Wrestling's chest, and its magic power dropped sharply. Immediately after, a ray of light fell, and a bat-like little demonic beast was also summoned. Dake looked at the field. That frost monster's stats were probably on par with Victor's monster, and it also had the freezing attribute. Regardless of whether it was the Eagleman Wrestler or the little demon beasts, they would have a hard time fighting against it. But, since Senior John Smith had such a powerful 3-star magic elf in his hand, why did he start with a spell? Was he looking down on others? 2 in 1 4 out of 100. Vote. As long as you believe in it. If you don't vote now, it's going to rot. You're tuning in to the Whispers of Romance YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.